We are calling the Putney Select Board meeting to order at 5:36. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
Yeah, I just want to add one item under select board items, and it's allocation of sewer and water for Mockingbird Tavern.
Where's that going to go, Karen?
It can just go in, in the last item under select board.
Okay. So we have an item G. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we need approval of minutes from April 22nd, 2020 and April 29th, 2020. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Hang on, David. Okay, go ahead, David.
And seconded.
Before we move on to public comment on items not on the agenda, I just want to give a little spiel as to how this goes. All mics will stay muted.
You got to do that vote for the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Josh. Is there any discussion?
Yes. So you don't have April 29th because I'm not quite done with them yet.
Oh, well, that's helpful, Karen.
I was working on them this afternoon, and I have to confirm something, and I have to go to the video.
Okay.
Okay, so you're voting on April 22nd only.
Okay. Do you want to amend the motion?
Sorry, what does it? I can't have things in front of me at the same time, so I'm not sure what it needs to read. If you ask for a motion,
we're just gonna, yeah, just a motion for April 22nd.
So I
striking April 29th.
I move to accept the minutes of April 22nd as presented.
And I second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
No.
Okay, hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Now I will move on to a little spiel. All mics will stay muted throughout the meeting, except for the select board and the town manager. Will unmute invited speakers during select board items where they've been invited to speak. We ask that you send a message in the chat if you would like to speak at any point, and just to understand that the select board and town manager and invited speakers will speak first. And then we have a really packed agenda, so we are going to limit discussion of items. And we'll do that as we go, depending on how many people want to talk at a time. So, all right, is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? All right, then so I'm just going to check the chat real quick to make sure. I'm not seeing any public comment on items not on the agenda. We're going to move on to the select board items. And the first item on our agenda is the Forest for Learning. And Larry, our town attorney, was invited to speak on this. So I think we'd like to hear from him first. And then maybe Karen, if you have anything further to say.
Sure. Let me unmute Larry. Okay, Larry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Where to begin here? First, Lionel, this is the first time that we've met, although we've corresponded several times, and I appreciate your patience, although I can imagine it might be wearing a little thin by now. So I thank you, for all the correspondence you've sent me. And let me see if I can just explain how I got to where I am, and then see if we can come to an agreement on how to go forward. there's no question in my mind that everybody has proceeded with the school forest property with.
Oh, no.
Hmm.
Oh,
I'm not liking this virtual meeting stuff.
Are we still there? I'm losing you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Yeah.
Okay,
Maybe
I
he
don't
can
see it.
call
That's
in.
right. You can hear me.
Okay.
We can hear you now.
All right. So you don't have to look at me anyway. And so to begin with, I'm aware of the history, and I want you to be understand. I'm aware of the background in terms of the Act 46 concerns and how you didn't want the school district property to end up with the new Union District. To the town of Putney. Town of Putney would hold it. You all look frozen. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, fine. Again, my screen is totally frozen, so I have no idea what's going on. And so as I say, I understand the background, and let's see where we can go forward so that the town and the residents of Putney are protected. With no town school district in place at this time, the town of Putney is the only entity legally responsible to protect that property at this time for future public use. And I know you folks worked very hard on organizing a 501c3 company, the Forest for Learning, as a legal entity to take title to the property. And then I believe it's your intentions to negotiate restrictive covenants with a land trust. Here are some of my concerns. A conveyance to a 501c3 entity is a wonderful thing, but it's no guarantee that the property will be permanently protected and preserved for public use. Even though the 501c.
Oh, come on.
Karen, can we ask him to call in?
Yeah, we got to get this. This is important.
I know.
They come.
Let me,
And if he
Can you
calls
hear me or not?
Oh, there you're back.
Larry. Where is?
Can you hear me?
We can, but you're going in and out,
Yeah.
and so it's sometimes helpful if you shut your video off, and it's sometimes helpful if you call in instead of using the computer to come in.
I will do whatever you suggest I do, Laura.
All right, hang on. I'm going to
I'll turn off my camera. Okay, the camera's off. Is that any better?
Yeah,
For
you're
the
clear
moment.
now for the moment. Exactly.
All right. If you lose me again, give me your number and I'll call it directly.
I'm going to give you a number right now. Hang on a minute.
Is it the one in your agenda?
Yes.
That long one?
Yes.
Wow, it's got like 10 numbers in it.
You have to dial the 1571 and then the access code too.
All right. Is that what you want me to do right now?
Please.
The sound seems all right for the moment, but
All right.
Yeah.
If you lose me again, we'll try I'll try to make a call. All right. So where I left off was the 501c3 entity. It's, as I say, it's a laudable goal to transfer the property to a 501c3, but a 501c3 entity in itself does not have a perpetual existence. In fact, in my legal career, I've had to deal with other 501c3 entities which have dissolved or for whatever reason did not continue in existence. And I have to think of the town, at least while this issue is on my plate, and while I say it's on my watch, so to speak, I'm thinking of the town 50 to 100 years down the road, and what guarantees can we provide to the town right now that this property will be forever protected for future public use. Now, when property is transferred to an ordinary land trust, even the land trust doesn't rely on its 501c3 status. there are always specific covenants and restrictive, land restrictions and restrictive covenants in the deed, as well as rights of first refusal, restrictions on rights of transfer, those sorts of things. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
So even though some of those provisions are included in a 501c3 organizational document, that organization, those documents can be amended, they can be revised, they can be rescinded. The best and only way to ensure that land is encumbered for future use is to make sure that the restrictions appear in the deed of transfer so that it runs with the land, and that all subsequent owners of the property are aware of the deed restrictions, both for its public purposes and its use. So that's just to kind of set the table and see how we get there. If it is the intention of Forest and Learning to negotiate land restrictions with the land trust, then I recommended to the select board that the select board have some input and involvement what those restrictions are to make sure that it is indeed protected for permanent and perpetual public use. I also think
We can't hear you now, Larry.
a reversion if the public purpose is in the.
We lost you. Could you
Now I'm
repeat
gone.
your last 2 sentences?
Lionel,
you're
will I
back.
ask, can you please stay muted until we call on you?
I did not unmute
And-
myself. Someone else did.
Okay. Oh. Larry, we couldn't hear
No.
you on that.
All right. If you can hear me now. Yes,
Yes.
just somebody say yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And it says,
Yes.
yeah, and it says poor network connection is what's coming up. I'm going to call you.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
That's probably for the best. Thank you.
So Karen, I dial 157 131.
Karen, are you hearing him?
Karen's muted.
Yeah.
Why is Karen muted? Oh my gosh, it's like a bad SNL skit.
Guys, give me your phone. I'm dying. She sent me a private number. All right, now we're on record. So some of the rights that I've suggested the select board should consider would be a right of reversion to the town of Putney in the event the property ever ceased to be used for public educational purposes or for what I call traditional recreational uses. You might want to consider a right of first refusal to purchase the property, even though there's a provision in the 501c3 docs that says it may not be sold. It doesn't indicate what would happen to the property other than it would have to be used for some other public purpose in the event that that entity dissolved. And there are a number of 501c3 purposes that may not be consistent with the intentions of the town of Putney or its future residents. So I think the town of Putney might want to have some input into what future uses would be allowed of the property, and in the event those uses are not conformed with that, it would revert to the town. I also don't think the property should be sold to a third party without town select board approval. I think that's something that the select board may wish to make sure is put in place. So I'm not trying to create difficulties for any entity, any party. The select board is the legislative body of the town of Putney. The town of Putney has been entrusted with 167 acres that propose to be transferred. And though that property is public property, it's property that is presently in public domain, and it should be forever at least protected and preserved for that purpose. But the transfer to a 501c3 entity does not achieve perpetual protection. And that's the only point I wish to make legally is that I don't want people to misunderstand that by conveyance to Forest for Learning that they have achieved perpetual and permanent public use. It doesn't work that way. For temporarily, while Forest and Learning is operating and conforms with its bylaws, that may well be the case. But 50 or 100 years from now, if that organization no longer exists, this property could be in the hands of some other entity, or it could be at a totally different use than anybody here envisions, unless there are really specific and guaranteed restrictions in the deed, or if not in the deed, it may be possible for to create what we call a freestanding, a declaration of restrictive covenants, which survive the deed, legal obligations and restrictions that obligate the property that would be of record that survive this particular conveyance. And Attorney Fisher and I talked about that briefly, but none of the purchase and sale intentions are binding. I want people to understand that. Once a deed is executed, and it was executed in a very general fashion to the town of Putney, none of the purchase and sale intentions and the meeting minutes, none of that stuff controls anymore. A deed of record becomes a full and final document enforceable within the four corners of the document. That is why land trust documents do not rely on any outside documents. Land trust documents have all restrictions, maps, and covenants attached to the deed itself, so that within the four corners of the documents, all intentions, present and future, are explained. That was my concern in having such a general deed from the town of Putney to Forest and Learning. There's nothing specific in that deed whatsoever that protects in perpetuity the land for public purposes. So those are my comments. I share those as your town council and as an attorney who's been involved in many, many land trust transactions. And it was always of some concern to me that it seemed to be this was being handled in although a very well-intentioned fashion, without some of the permanent protections that I've been accustomed to seeing. So with that, I've shared my comments, and you folks, if you have any questions, I can answer them. But I'm more than happy to work with Attorney Fisher and Lionel and everybody else to figure out how we can accomplish what you want to accomplish in a permanent and binding way.
Thank you, Larry. Karen, I'd like to turn it over to you first if you have any questions or comments.
I don't have any at the moment. I'm sure Lionel would like to speak.
Okay. I would like to give the select board an opportunity first. And Larry, you're able to hang in for a while with us?
I am.
Okay, great. So Josh, I'm guessing you have something you'd like to ask or say?
I'd like to understand how we got to the point where the select board had a deed in front of us that appeared to have legal counsel's approval that we voted on. And then legal counsel came back and said, no, this isn't right. I'm just confused as to how that happened. And I understand frustration on the part of Forest for Learning. I'm also frustrated because I certainly had the feeling this was all being done the way it was meant to, and when it was presented to us, that became clear it wasn't. And I don't know how that happened. So, can you shed some light on that?
Well, maybe Karen can shed some light. I expressed concerns in writing and in person to the town months ago, and even Lionel was made aware of my concerns about restrictions, the lack of restrictions, permanent safeguards for the town, and those are in emails and of record, and that's it serves no purpose to necessarily go through those, but I've been consistent all along, Josh, that I just had some very serious concerns about the generality of the process, and I was led to understand that the select board were comfortable with the transfer and did not wish to place any further protections or restrictions on the transfer because of the good faith work by the school district and Forest for Learning in the past. And that was, that was my understanding of how it came back to me. And I felt that, I had done my job as town council by raising the concerns. And then more recently, within the last couple of weeks, Karen again had a conversation with me and said, boy, Larry says, maybe I should go back to the board again and remind them of your concerns. And I said, well, Karen, listen, I'll put in a longer email what those concerns are, and you can share it with whoever you wish. And I did that, and I'm speculating, but I believe that Karen shared that with one or more of the board members, my concerns some time ago, and my letter to Bob Fisher. I'm looking at the email to Bob Fisher, which was pretty recent. It's April 3rd, where I outlined, and I had a good conversation with Bob. Bob seemed to understand my concerns. He's also been involved in a number of land trust transactions. So nothing I said was of news or startling to Bob. And I think we both kind of agreed that maybe we should just slow this process down a little bit and make sure that all the legal steps will be in place to make sure this is permanently preserved and protected to the extent we all want it to be 100 years from now. So, Josh, that's how we got to where it is.
Okay, thank you. I guess I don't know whether I don't know what happened, and I mean we don't need to rehash it. I think it's too bad that however that miscommunication occurred, or that I didn't have a clear message. I mean, the message when we took that vote 2 weeks ago was everything's set to go and Larry has signed off on it. And so I'm not sure how that happened. And we don't need to rehash it. Thank you for the explanation. But we need to figure out how to move forward because we do all have the same intention of wanting to make this happen.
So Josh, if I may, just one comment. Josh, the deed you have in front of you is lawful and it would convey the property, but the deed you have in front of you does not achieve the kind of protections that I've articulated in email correspondence for a couple of months now.
Okay.
Thank you. Josh, do you have any more questions or comments?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. David?
I have a question to Lionel, actually.
Okay.
The time for that. What I want to understand, Lionel, is how does having these restrictions on the deed, the language our lawyer is advising us to try to put in there, how does that stop you from doing what you want to do with the land? How is this a roadblock to you? So I can understand, your position.
Lionel, is Lionel still muted?
No.
Okay.
There.
Can you hear us, Lionel?
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. I have a lot of things I'd like to share with the group, but I'll be glad to answer your question first, David. The process of land protection is complex. There's always less money available than people would like. And are you able to hear me?
I'm hearing you so far. Thank you.
Okay, there's some feedback here, so I'm not sure why that is. So there are two basic ways that one can convey a conservation easement. One is for free. Actually, there are three ways. If you're really unlucky, you end up paying to have a conservation easement done on land. And that is unfortunately something that started happening in the 80s as a result of costs associated with appraisals and legal fees and so on that land trusts became aware would break their banks if they didn't somehow get those costs covered. And so some folks actually pay land trusts in order to take their land. In other cases, it's a free situation where people approach a land trust and they say, I would like to protect this land, and they donate the easement. The value of the development rights are donated. For the lucky few who happen to have a property that is ecologically significant, that is strategically important for larger scale conservation efforts, statewide and regional wildlife corridors, and other issues of biological diversity conservation. And if the cards are right, if things time out well, those few people are actually in a position to sell the development rights to that conservation organization. And that's money. And Forest for Learning, as you probably remember, has very little money. The only money it has is being held by the town of Putney, which now I guess we're going to have to spend on legal fees with Bob Fisher, from what I gather from this. But our hope for a couple of years now, as we've been thinking about this property, trying to protect it, trying to ensure public access, not just on paper, but in reality, in the form of trails that are not eroding and bridges that are not collapsing. The only way to have Forest for Learning function and to have the land cared for in the way that everyone has always said they'd like to see it cared for is if there's funding available to maintain the property and maintain that public access. And we've been talking about a boardwalk that may cost upwards of $50,000. And so, to answer your question, the issue with associating restrictive language to the deed is that it effectively makes the property protected already, and it becomes unattractive to land trusts. Land trusts are, like I said, everyone has limited funding. Land trusts, especially so, they all must prioritize where they're going to do their conservation and why. And they do not waste time protecting land that is already protected. They protect land that is vulnerable to development. In other words, not protected. And I have registered these concerns to Larry Slayson. He made reference to the fact that he has communicated with me about this. His communication was simply to send a few questions my way.
Hey,
which
Lionel,
I replied
if this is going
Yes.
beyond what David asked, can we just stick to the question that David asked right now?
Yeah, this is answering David's question.
Okay.
David is asking why would it be problematic for Forest for Learning to have restrictive language associated with the deed?
Okay.
And
it just feels like you're going down a different road.
It's something, well, there are lots of roads that Mr. Slayson has opened up that need to be walked on. Absolutely.
I can appreciate that. David, do you feel like that answered your question?
I think it does. I think what you're telling me is that to be one of the lucky few, you need to be able to sell the development rights to a land trust, and you can't do that if the restrictive language is attached to the deed. So that you
Exactly.
won't be able to. Basically, that's the answer, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. I got it. Okay.
So I have some questions for Larry. Larry, looking back on the original deed, the charge to the town is pretty clear. And I appreciate where you're coming from and the concerns that you've brought to us, because I think that it is your job as our town attorney to bring these kind of concerns before us. But again, looking back on the original documentation, the charge to us is really to be a pass-through. And the intention of the school board was maybe not as clearly outlined as you would have liked it. And maybe looking back, it could have been done a little bit better. But I'm curious if we're stepping outside of our role as a pass-through right now.
Yes.
If you're directing that to me, I think you have to decide, your own parameters and your own obligations to the folks you serve and your voters. I think it's clear that the voters intended for this property ultimately to be managed by a nonprofit entity.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not it was specifically Forest for Learning, that was ultimately, I believe, approved by a town vote. But I think it also runs through all the documents that is the intention that it's going to be perpetually preserved and protected for some type of public educational use. And as I say, I don't mean to disparage anyone. This has been great work and a lot of work getting this 501c3 together. The question is, when ultimately will we have protections in place which permanently and perpetually protect the property? Now, I agree fully with Lionel that we could end up making it less attractive for a land trust to purchase development rights if the town restricts it. And so I think that if Lionel is working with or has communicated with a potential land trust and those conversations are underway, I think it's a wonderful thing. I would hope that the Forest for Learning would allow or encourage maybe some select board input as to what some of those restrictions and restrictive covenants would look like and what those public uses would consist of, so that the town, that the select board can feel comfortable that those uses are protected. Also, I'm not aware that the land trust would object if the town had a right of reverter. I mean, I guess it's something I would like to ask Vermont Land Trust or otherwise. If the town of Putney, for example, says in the event the property were not used for public purposes and public educational purposes, it shall revert to the town of Putney, or that the town of Putney would have the right of first refusal to buy this property for $1 before it were ever transferred to a third party. It would not be my intention to inhibit a land trust from restricting this property and paying Forest for Learning for those restrictive covenants. But I think town of Putney should be the ultimate repository of the land. If the uses are not complied with, or if organizations dissolve in the future, I don't like it going through IRS 501c3 legalese and then having a battle of what will be the future use of the property and who ends up with it. That's happened before with 501c3 entities. And that's why, again, land trust doesn't deal with that. They put it right in the deed what the restrictive covenants are, and who gets the property and who gets rights of reversion and who has rights of first refusal. All I'm asking is that Lionel and Forest for Learning include the select board in their process when they negotiate, and that the ultimate rights come back to the town of Putney, not some other entity, in the event of breach or dissolution. That, in my opinion, would be what the select board is vested and charged to do. And I think the town has made it clear that they want the select board to cooperate with Forest and Learning to the extent possible to do that. And I'll make one further statement. To the extent that Bob Fisher works with Forest for Learning and negotiations occur with the land trust, I will represent the town of Putney at no cost in protecting the town of Putney interest on behalf of the select board in this endeavor. It's for a public purpose, and I would contribute my legal time to that, representing the town of Putney.
Well, thank you for that. So let me ask you, if they put the right of reversion in to the deed, that's enough to make you feel, would that at a minimum be enough to make you feel comfortable?
I think it's an improvement. I think there's a number of things that a land trust would agree to do to enable Putney to have a right of first refusal, to have a right of the written consent before it could be sold, a right of reverter, all of those sorts of things. And again, does the select board wish to have any involvement in the types of restrictive covenants placed on the property? Does it wish to have any involvement? Who can use it? For what purpose? Type of thing. I mean, those are the questions I raised. I don't mean to suggest I have all the answers. That's for the select board and Forest and Learning to iron out.
So I honestly, I don't know that that's our position, but Lionel, would a right of reversion and a right of first choice be a compromise that you would be willing to make on this? Do you feel like that would not, that wouldn't affect the property in a negative way?
Well, I can see that I'm not going to be actually afforded an opportunity to simply speak, that I'm going to be asked specific questions. So I will take the opportunity at this time to ask a couple of very specific questions of you and the rest of the board and Larry Slason.
Lionel, I'm happy to let you speak, but this is a process, and so
yes, it is a process. It needs to be a give and take, and there has been simply take happening. I respectfully ask, have you received the letter that we wrote, and can we make that public record, the 8-page letter that we submitted yesterday?
Absolutely. I received it. I read it. I can't speak for the rest of the board. I see David nodding his head. He read it. Josh, were you able to?
I haven't read every word, but I've read the bulk of it.
Okay.
And
Did Mr. Slason read that letter?
It automatically becomes public record when you forward something like that to us. So it
I'm
is.
just wondering if Mr. Slason has read the letter. Are you? This conversation is feeling somewhat surreal to me because we've been talking about things that are all addressed in the bylaws of Forest for Learning, which were sent specifically to all board members, select board members, a week ago. And if you have read the bylaws and you have read the purposes and the specific purposes, it is abundantly clear that we would be in violation of our bylaws if we did not protect the land in perpetuity and make it available for public use. So can we please take a step back and discuss the bylaws, which I presume everyone on this call who is involved in the issue has had an opportunity to read. And can we please discuss whether or not the bylaws satisfy the concerns of the select board and their council?
So Lionel, I'll respond to that. I guess I've got to be clear in what I said initially. My concern is indeed that 501c3 bylaws are not binding on the parties and do not constitute a binding restriction on the property. They are not. They are. Excuse me. Let me finish.
Yes.
501c3 bylaws do not run with the land. Run with the land means permanent restrictive covenants in a deed which run with the land. Whoever uses, owns, occupies the land in the future are subject to covenants which run with the land. 501c3 entity bylaws, just like corporate bylaws and organizational documents, govern the organization but do not run with the property. And so even though your organization is set up for this purpose, and laudably so and with good intentions, the organizational documents are not a legal document which binds the property. And that's the point I was trying to make with my introduction, that a 501c3 is no guarantee that property will be permanently protected and preserved for public use. When you negotiate the restrictive covenants with a land trust, when they buy those covenants are going to be recorded and will be permanent restrictions that run with the land. Your bylaws will not. And so until that happens, we really don't have a permanent restriction on that property. And to say that to you, to someone who's put in so much work in it, has got to be, a horrible thing to hear. But it's my job just to explain the legal foundation on which I'm advising the board. So
yes, may I speak?
Sure.
Yeah. So Karen and Laura sent me an email today asking whether our attorney, if you want to call Bob Fisher our attorney, if Bob Fisher would be attending this call. And I responded that he would not be attending this call because it was my interest to simply have a conversation with the select board about these matters. And I find it very interesting that not only is Mr. Slayson on this call, but that Mr. Slayson was given the opportunity to define, in a sense, the entire issue at length before any discussion of the 8-page letter that we sent, which concluded with the statement, we would appreciate the select board explaining to us why there has been such a dramatic change in tone from the 4 years that we've been working on this issue. As Josh mentioned earlier, we were virtually at the point of signing the contract when this happened. And the town manager said in the beginning of the discussion prior to your vote to unanimously go forward with signing the deed, the town manager stated that the town attorney was on board. And all of a sudden, we are somewhere else entirely. And to expect us, the Forest for Learning Board, who have worked so hard and have been completely transparent in all of our dealings with the town, to suddenly just be expected to be told what to do after we've been discussing this transparently with you for years is just amazing. It feels surreal to me. So I'm sorry, Laura, if you feel it's inappropriate for us to have this level of discussion, but there's been reference made to emotions being raised, and this is why emotions are raised, because there appears to be no connection between what we've been trying to communicate with you all along, what you yourselves have done by publishing the letter, by doing everything by the book, and Mr. Slayson sent me questions in January, which I answered, which he never responded to. And now he's had a conversation with Bob Fisher in private about this issue without our knowledge. We supposedly have an attorney. We did not intend to retain an attorney for the purposes of arbitration. We only asked for Bob Fisher to help us out to get the 501c3 set up. Well, Mr. Slayson has offered to donate his services to the town of Putney, but because Mr. Fisher is not on the call, we have no idea if Bob Fisher will also follow suit and kindly enter into a bona fide situation of donating his services so that the two lawyers can have free discussions for months on end. Forgive me.
Lionel, I have to stop you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So Don Swag has a question. Don, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my brain right now around, we've had all these board meetings as Forest for Learning and talked about so much of this over the past couple of years. And I'm wondering, my understanding was that a lot of this, not just like our bylaws as a 501c3, but that the conservation easement would include a lot of these same legal things in it, where it goes back to the town. And in fact, it's in our bylaws that like if Forest for Learning at some point dissolves, that it goes back to the town. And so I'm trying to figure out why we can't accomplish this with the conservation easement. Like, does the town trust us to, and I'm happy to work with select board members, like as we go through this. I don't want to speak for the entire board, but why can we not include some of these legal protections for the in perpetuity, like 100 years from now, in the conservation easement?
Don, I want to, we definitely want to work with you on this. It's not, when our attorney raises issues to us, we do have a duty to respond to them. And that's all that's happening here.
No.
And my concern, and honestly, I see what Larry is saying in your documentation, is that if for some reason something were to go really wrong and you weren't able to get a conservation easement, this document actually can put it back to the state or the federal government. It doesn't automatically put it back to the town. And that's really concerning to me.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I get that. But so it's just so the question is like, do we chance not getting protection through a conservation easement because we're putting more stipulations in a deed transfer? I don't know. I just wanted to ask that question.
Larry, do you have any feedback? Or Josh, were you trying to?
My opinion would be that the concern is, Dawn, and I agree with you, and I think if we can figure out a way to do that so that we guarantee those aspects in a conservation easement, which as per your bylaws are required, et cetera, it's the window between now and a conservation easement being issued that I think is of concern, because if, for example, you were to go to get a conservation easement and right now, things are not going well for conservation folks, et cetera, if that window extends and extends and extends and for some reason doesn't happen easily, I think that's the vacuum that Larry's concerned about and that he is voicing that we need to be concerned about, is that once we transfer this land, and I want to ask a follow-up question to Larry, but once we transfer this land to you, it's in that no man's land between being protected and not. And we all totally understand that the best of intentions are there. Larry, can you answer for me, if we voted to approve this, are we bound to, we all want to approve this. And we all want to make this, we all want to expedite it in the best way possible, but we also are charged as the select board with protecting the best interests of the town. And that's where it suddenly flared up, was when there was this sense that we had gone and we had signed this, and then there was further question from Larry, and I don't know how that miscommunication. But Larry, are we at a point where we have, for all practical purposes, already signed that document by voting unanimously to do so?
No, no transfer is effective until the deed is executed and delivered. And you voted to transfer it, but the circumstances under which the transfer occur still haven't been articulated with finality. There's a couple of ways to approach this, I think, in terms of meeting the concerns. One would be to have the deed include some of the reversionary language or the restrictions on transfer that we've talked about in terms of concerns. But it may be possible, if indeed Forest and Learning does have counsel, but it may be possible to prepare a document which survives closing. In other words, a document that would be binding on both parties that survives the closing on the sale, that allows the town or requires, if you will, Forest and Learning, when it negotiates the restrictive covenant, to ensure that the restricted covenants include a right of reverter to the town of Putney and a right of first refusal and those sorts of things, so that the Forest and Learning would have, those obligations in negotiating, and maybe that's practical, maybe it isn't. The other thing that could be done to further help would be to amend the bylaws of Forest for Learning to make it clear and provide specifically that in the event of dissolution of the organization and in the event that it ever ceases to be used for public educational purposes, that the land would revert to the town of Putney specifically. So there's multiple things that could be done, I think, to further address the concerns that have been raised. And I don't want to sit here and suggest that there's only one avenue. I think, frankly, a multiple prong approach would be the best result for everyone. And there may even be other ideas out there by Attorney Fisher or others, in addition to the two or three that I've just suggested. So again, we got to come back to the premise that a 501c3 bylaw does not run with the land. It's not whether it's binding or anything else or legal. It does not run with the land. We need a document of record that runs with the land in perpetuity, that guarantees public use, and provides for a reverter to the town of Putney in the event that public use is not fulfilled. That's the ultimate objective, and how we achieve that, I think if we all focus on that, we should be able to achieve that in a multiple of ways.
Is that something that you could work on with Bob, and the Forest for Learning could approve, and we could get back to very quickly, like within a week?
Well, I don't know about a week. It's going to take a little bit of thought, both in terms of the amendment of the bylaws and the document that survives closing. I mean, what we'd have to hear from Forest and Learning is their feeling. Have they started conversations with the land trust, and how would the land trust that they're negotiating with feel about a right of reverter, a right of first refusal to the town of Putney? I just don't know how that would affect their negotiations. And I think we would need some further input from Forest and Learning so that we don't undermine the good work that they're trying to do. So there's going to be multiple layers of input here. I wouldn't want to force it to occur within a week or two. I think this is something that needs to be resolved, over a couple of more weeks with some careful thought.
And I really come back to I reading number 6 in the purchase and sale contract. I come back to, like, is this our conversation to even be having? It was very clear from the school board what they intended. It was to be deeded over to a nonprofit, and they didn't build those protections in to this. And so while I feel it's important for us to have this conversation, I think that the select board has to consider if we are overstepping in this conversation.
The only thing I'd say to that, remember, a purchase and sale agreement does not run with the land and does not survive a closing. A purchase and sale agreement serves as a tool to illustrate the types of protections that should appear in the deed.
And that's why you're the attorney. So,
Yeah, the other thing I would say, Laura, is, it was clearly, I mean, it's everybody's intention, including the school board who initially transferred this, that this should be protected in perpetuity. And I think that's what Larry is, that's this, again, this sort of window of possibility where that we lose that. I think that would be a failing on the select board's part if that was brought to our attention as a possibility. Just because it was overlooked by those who came before us doesn't mean, and it's clearly not being overlooked by Forest for Learning, but if it doesn't have the legal teeth that our council tells us it needs, then we wouldn't be doing justice. But
okay. So
I don't know what our willingness is to, I mean, Larry has generously offered to do this free of charge on his part. I don't know whether Bob would be willing to do that. My guess is that Bob and Larry could figure this out pretty quickly, that there wouldn't have to be a huge number of hours. I don't know whether we feel any obligation, because we stumbled on this a little bit, to support that financially if there are costs incurred in the process. And I personally, I think we could ask Bob to be as generous as he could, but if there were some fees involved, I wouldn't be totally opposed to trying to help with that, but I don't know.
I wouldn't either. Emily has asked Lionel, would putting any right of refusal, etc., in the deed reduce conservation value? And that was one of my questions as well. A right of reversion, a right of refusal. can we have those put into the deed and solve this issue? Yes, Lionel.
Hang on.
Oh, we're getting there.
Here we are. It might be all right. One thing to keep in mind with regard to the reverter clause would be that the Forest for Learning has a vested obligation to maintain the property as an educational resource for kids and adults. And we would need to have confidence that the town of Putney would honor that themselves. And if the town of Putney is strapped financially, I hope that this situation that's going on now does not result in the need to cut back on things. That could be a concern for us. That if we were to, we do take our bylaws very seriously, and we wrote them ourselves. So we want to see them actually done in perpetuity. And so the reverter clause would need to work in both directions. We would need to have confidence that Putney would not only honor our bylaws, the specific and general purposes of our bylaws, but also that it would be prepared to honor whatever covenants the conservation easement included. So as long as we had that confidence in Putney, then yes, we'd be open to that. And as far as would it diminish the value of the easement, that's something I would need to look into. I wouldn't think so, as long as the terms of the easement, the reason the organization would take on an easement would be to protect certain natural resource values indefinitely. And so as long as the organization had confidence that the town of Putney was able and willing to adhere itself to the terms of the easement, then they might not have a problem with the reverter clause. That was one of the questions. What was the other? One was reverter, and the other was right of refusal.
Right of refusal, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about right of refusal. I'm okay with that, but again, the same issues would apply. Putney would have the right of refusal, but recognize that it wouldn't, because we are protecting the land. It will severely limit what Putney can and can't do with that land later. And so that may be an issue for townspeople. They may say, what business does the town of Putney have taking on this 170-acre property that's got hundreds of people visiting it all the time, and has invasive species issues, has rare wildlife species management requirements, has eroding trails, has issues from climate change, and so on. So if Putney feels sincerely that it really wants that, then I personally don't have an issue with it, and we could discuss it. Our board could discuss it.
Larry, do you have any opinion on the reverse of that, as Lionel's saying?
Well, I don't right now. I think it would be helpful to know whether or not there's any ongoing conversations with the land trust entity, and the land trust entity could be a third party to this conversation as to what, for example, a right of reverter to the town of Putney. Remember, these would only take place in the event that the land was no longer being used for public educational purposes. So I'm less concerned about the town taking on those obligations. The right of reversion only occurs if those obligations have failed, or if the entity becomes dissolved. And so if the entity becomes dissolved or those obligations aren't being fulfilled, I don't want it to end up with some other organization that the town of Putney has no control over. This was town of Putney land, and I think the select board has a legislative obligation, if you will, to make sure that it's perpetually preserved for Putney residents and not come into the hands of some other federal or state organization.
Larry, would striking the state and federal language from the purchase and from the quick claim be helpful?
No, the profit. No, it would not. Would have to be something again. The bylaws have to be amended. I don't mean to sound dogmatic. I would suggest that the bylaws be amended to address the concerns that have been raised. That's the first point. That's easy. Secondly, I would feel much better as town council if some of those restrictions at least appear in the deed, or with some language stating that in the event the property is further subject to restrictive covenants, that if those covenants are not, for educational purposes, in the event that those covenants are not fulfilled, the property shall revert to the town of Putney. I mean, we could create some fairly succinct language that would address our concerns. What I don't know is whether or not the land trust has a different vision. In some of the deals I've negotiated with the Vermont Land Trust, the Vermont Land Trust is the repository. If the owner and user of the property violates it, in some cases there's enforcement provisions and the property goes to the land trust. And so the land trust might want to take this in the event that there was some breach in the future. And that's where having a land trust party to this conversation might be of help to all of us.
Lionel, is there a land trust involved? Is the land trust involved? Are you in conversation with them?
I've been unable. This is a very sensitive, strategic process. It's not something you want to kind of come in on and go back out on. You don't want to sort of own land before you start talking about easements. You really need to come in ready to go. The narrative, the complete package of what is it that is being offered. And so I have had to hold my tongue and wait until the land comes to us before seriously engaging in this discussion. But that said, I have mentioned to a board member of the Northeast Wilderness Trust that we have this property, that it's a remarkable property, and that we might be interested in talking to them. I've also put out a call to the Upper Valley Land Trust, but I haven't spoken back. They haven't replied to my call yet. I am not comfortable at all with Larry Slayson or the Select Board joining me for discussions of this nature. I'm not interested in that. I don't think I would like to do that. What I would be comfortable to do would be to do the work that I've intended to do and come back and report on a very regular basis to the Select Board. I'd be more than happy to share status updates every 2 weeks, every week, or even more often via email, if that would be of interest, so that the Select Board is fully informed as to what's going on. And if the Select Board's counsel then has follow-up questions based on the reports that I'm sharing, those questions could be brought to me by the Select Board, and I would be more than happy to answer those questions. But I do not want some sort of a group exercise at this point when it comes to trying to find the best easement possible for this land. And if there are any doubts or questions about my qualifications in this work, I would be more than happy to share my resume. I can even produce references if that's of interest to the Select Board. I assure you at this time that I'm fully qualified for this work. And
Lionel,
I believe my board would say that as well. I think it's relevant, Laura. I think it's relevant. I'm not suggesting that I'm taking this personally or that this is an emotional thing. I'm simply trying to remind the board that it has the best forest for learning it could possibly imagine having. We have an incredible board of trustees that are remarkably qualified and fired up. We are fired up to do our work, and our first order of business is to get the conservation easement. It's why we made it number one of our purposes. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And if there's any doubt, then I must say there's been talk from Mr. Slayson about the PSNA not having any legal basis. Well, holy cow. Was Alice Laughlin aware of that when she wrote the PSNA on behalf of the school board? What was the school board? Emily, you're here on the call. You were on the school board at the time. Were you aware that had no legal standing? Did you know that the town could simply ignore that part?
Lionel, I'm sorry, I have to stop you again. I can see your passion, and I greatly appreciate it. And I don't believe that anybody on the select board is questioning your qualifications. I believe that we all have an enormous amount of confidence in your qualifications, in the qualifications of the many experienced people on your board, and in the passion and commitment you have to protecting this land. I think our concern is if anything goes wrong in this process, what protects this land down the road, and would it come back to the town? And so how do we navigate that? You seem to have time constraints here and time concerns. Can you tell us what they are so that as we're going forward through this, we can hopefully support and respect them?
Yes, I'd be glad to. First of all, we have developed a logo for Forest for Learning, which is connected to a website, which we have ready to go. We've been in touch with Chris Mitch, who wrote Learning on the Land. He wrote that 150-page dissertation on the property. We have permission from him to reprint his work on our website. So we are eager to get going with our website. We have an issue with invasive species that is ongoing, particularly wild parsnip, which requires mechanical work, and it may have costs associated with it as well. We have the kiosk, which is at the pool, which currently says school forest and is completely confusing to the public. The public is unaware who owns the land now. Through the coronavirus, we've been unsure what to do as far as whether or not to ask people not to use the trails. And so we have the public use is ongoing. We're in negotiation with an insurance company regarding the liability insurance. I have a 30-day quote from the insurance company that will give us a volunteer liability protection as well as general public liability protection. That will expire in 2 weeks. And we have, am I missing anything else, folks? Could you please share?
If anybody has anything else, would you add it to the chat or raise your hand? Okay. So are all of these things contingent on us signing this quit sale?
Well, no, not necessarily. We've been doing a lot of work with the assumption that we were going to have an amicable and happy transfer of the land. We've all been thrown frankly by what's happened most recently, and it's got us uncertain whether we should continue to put this much effort into the property if the outcome is going to be something troubling. Mr. Slason,
I just want to again assure you.
Off my property! Get it off of here! I'll write a post, please.
Well, that leads into our next meeting topic. But
All right, I'm gonna
love a little levity. So I guess, we've spent an hour plus on this, and this is an important topic. And I feel like it's really important that we are able to get to where we need to be, but I'm not sure that we're going to get there tonight. And there is nothing that our intention is for this to happen. So I want to, as far as Josh and David chime in if I'm misrepresenting anybody here, but it is our full intention that this land will be transferred. But we need to have the assurances that our lawyer is comfortable with this. Don Zwig is asking, Lionel, has Bob done relevant work on easements with land trusts? I've been trying to learn as much as possible about this over the last couple of days and wonder about some of what's written in this. And she sent a link to deed restrictions. So I'm just not sure that we're going to be able to finish this tonight. And we're committed to finishing this. So I'm curious, like, how we can get to a place where everybody can leave at this moment comfortable and confident in that fact, and that your needs are being met as far as going forward with the things that you're doing.
Can I suggest that perhaps we ask Larry to be in touch with Bob Fisher as soon as possible? And Lionel, I don't, if you're not comfortable with Larry and Bob talking about this amongst themselves, then that's a problem. But if everybody on the call is comfortable with Larry and Bob having a conversation in order to try and come to as simple and clean a resolution to this as possible at as low a cost as possible, that would be my feeling. I've seen Bob and Larry work together before. They work really well together. They're very capable. They both have a lot of experience in this realm. And I would think they could come up with a good solution for us pretty quickly and effectively. But if you all aren't interested in that, then we won't ask them to do.
Am I muted right now?
No, please.
I'm not, I
Go ahead.
can't tell. I don't understand. I'm deeply concerned. Larry Slayson has brought up a great many issues. He mentioned the email that he sent to Bob, which he did not include me on. He communicated with Bob privately, and Bob chose to share that email with me, which I have shared with my board for information purposes. I would have embedded the entire text of Larry's email in the 8-page letter that we sent you, but because there was confidentiality clauses written on it, I was not sure whether it was okay for me to do so. But since Larry has made reference on this call to his email of April 30th, I could tell you that there are a number of issues that he's raised, which in my mind are completely addressed by the bylaws. I take his point that you can't trust anybody, but that's not how Putney works. This is not Putney's culture. And if it were Putney's culture, the school board would never have given the property to the town to hold for the past 2 years. The school board trusted the town of Putney to hold the land. And now I ask the select board to trust Forest for Learning to take the land and do what it is that we've always said we were going to do. The mistrust that Mr. Slayson talks about, to me, is unfounded. And if we are forced to continue down this road to come up with some sort of legal codicil that will provide assurance to the select board, we will do so. But if it becomes increasingly painful, I, for one, will not be interested in continuing my work with Forest for Learning.
I'm sorry to hear that, Lionel, and I'm sorry also to hear it seems like you're implying that Larry has been trying to do things in a way that's not productive, and there may have been things that Larry did that were not productive for you, but I hear a sense of sort of intentionality, and I would certainly, I've worked with Larry for 15 years now, and I have found him always to be honest and above board and working for the best interests of the town. So I just want to make clear that I'm finding the way you are using a somewhat accusatory tone towards Larry, I find it personally offensive. So I made a suggestion that perhaps Larry and Bob could do something quickly and effectively, but if we are trying to be pushed around in the process of doing our legal due diligence, then I'm going to take real issue with that. So I'm going to put it back on you, Lionel, as far as that's concerned, and say, we have an obligation to the townspeople. Yes, we're a pass-through, and maybe the P&S didn't have teeth. I don't know for sure. I'm not a lawyer, but we have the obligation to do the right thing by the townspeople. That's why we're elected to this job. It's not a mistrust issue with Larry and you, and between Larry and the Forest for Learning. It's a fact that he feels there are parts that are missing, and that's not because of mistrust. It's because they're missing. So I just have to be clear that I don't like the tone of what's being said, and I object to it.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to add too that things happen in the world, things that none of us plan to have happen, things that and we're living through that right now, and we have to do our due diligence. And so I recognize how inconvenient this is and how hard you all have worked. And I see your hand. We will. I'll take one more comment on this, and then we really do have to wrap it up. But as you know, I appreciate everything you do. I also, we can't be emotionally blackmailed through this, and we also have nothing but good intentions and want to do this the Putney way. But we have to think of the future, and we have to think of what happens to that forest in perpetuity. And so if that means that we have to take a few more weeks with this, we have to take a few more weeks with this. And what I'm asking you is, how can we be as supportive as we can through that process to make sure that it's not damaging to your cause? So I'm sorry. Go ahead and speak. I see your hand. I'm not remembering your name. I'm sorry. Dawn, thank you.
I mean, I think right now my biggest concern as a board member is that our lawyer, who we did not hire for this kind of work, so I don't know what his ability is in working with Larry on this, because obviously we want to fast track so we don't lose some of those things that Lionel was talking about, like our insurance quote and all of these other pieces that are very time sensitive that we've worked for a year and a half on now. So I feel like I just need to know that this is an area of expertise for our lawyer going into this, so that it can go as quickly as possible if these things have to happen for the town to feel comfortable with the land transfer. And I just feel like we don't know that. And if I know for sure that Bob can do this work and that he and Larry can work together, I just feel like that's a huge unknown right now with this ending of this conversation for me.
So just to clarify, are you referring to Bob as your lawyer or not?
Yeah, well, yes, but we only hired him to help us become a 501c3, which he's done. And so this is all new and out of the blue. This was very unexpected. And so we've done all of this other legwork, assuming based on other communications and votes that this transfer was not going to be an issue. So this is all, it's just all very new, and trying to figure out, okay, so what are our next steps as a board? And does Bob have the expertise to take on this next level of negotiation? I don't know.
I believe he does.
Okay. So Larry believes he does.
I do.
Okay. Karen, did you had something to add?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to comment that this whole process for the land transfer has been unconventional. And Lionel, you've done a lot of work, and you and Larry went back and forth for a long time. The town has spent some funds too, just trying to get to this point. Our intent is to transfer the property. And like everyone said here, we support you, Lionel, and Forest for Learning. We know your mission, and, I'll take full responsibility and accountability for the disconnect that got us to here, okay? I know it was brought up in January, and it was brought up in a few meetings with the Selectboard regarding the deed, but Larry and I, we talked about it. I spoke to Laura about it. So this is why we're here, and we need to protect this property for everyone, for the children, for the next generation. And so I hope we can work together, Lionel. And if there's an issue about the finances, I can look at the budget, okay? We need to be a team and get this completed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Karen. So I think that next steps are, if you're all amenable, is for Larry and Bob to have a conversation, see if there's some simple things that we can do to bring this back to a place where we all feel comfortable. And speaking for myself, I would be happy to do a special meeting to make this happen faster if it came up at a non-regular meeting time. Josh, David, how do you feel about that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we want to keep this ball rolling for you. And it is 7:03, and the sheriff has been waiting exceptionally patiently. And so I really think that we need to close this out, and I hope that we can close it out on a good note with, I know that it's not exactly where you want it to be, but I hope that you have confidence in us that we're going to get there.
Oh, sorry, Lionel. Hang on a minute. Okay.
I just said thank you very much. Thank you for your time tonight. We're just. I apologize for being emotional tonight. It's been very stressful for me. It's something that I've really put a lot of time into, hundreds of hours, and I was feeling so good about everything, and I thought we were done. And it's just taking me a little time to get used to the fact that we're not quite done yet. So thank you for all your, thank you for this good conversation, and we'll continue.
Okay. Thanks, Lionel. And we really do appreciate all you've done and recognize. And we're in a COVID crisis. I mean, everybody go a little gentle on themselves right now, okay? So, all right. So we are going to close this conversation out for now and move on to the animal control conversation, which was so nicely alluded to earlier. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Is caller 5 a ghost?
Potentially. I don't know. Things are moving really fast right now.
I know, because we had somebody else on the phone, Luann Wilson.
Oh, is Larry still with us?
No, I think Larry's gone.
Okay, good.
But, yeah, Luann Wilson was in the background yelling at the dog.
Oh.
I'm here.
Right. Hello, Luann.
Hey, Luann.
Hello. So, I'm
Hi, Luann.
Yes.
Can we hear that? So I think that we were going to hear from Sheriff Anderson first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were calling.
That's okay.
Fine.
Were you
Okay.
trying to? Did you want Luann to speak, Karen, or were you just trying to check in to see if she was here?
No, she's going to speak. She has a dog complaint.
Oh, okay. All right. My apologies, Luann. I guess you're up.
No problem. Oh, right now?
Yes.
Oh, fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead, Luann.
Okay, fine. Well, I've typed some things up just so that I hopefully get everything in. So I'm just going to read this to you folks. For a considerable time now, I've been harassed by noise from my neighbor's dogs. A young man named Aaron Pierce lives behind me in the house his grandmother occupied when I bought my house. She lived there a few years and with her little dachshunds, and then her health failed, and she had to move to the Midwest and let her daughter take care of her. And a couple of years ago, her grandson moved in, and he brought with him a big German Shepherd, which barks a great deal of the time, and which he never brings in at night, so that, I mean, it's in a screen porch. the entire, and as far as I knew, all through the winter, it was in a screen porch, which seemed inappropriate to me. And he absolutely refuses to bring the dog in to spare me being awakened at night frequently by this animal. Okay, the other issue with this is I have been in touch with law enforcement at one point, and this fellow was put in jail for a few days for whatever all, I don't even know. But he continues to pursue noise in the night, especially Saturday evening just a few weeks ago, having a huge blowout barbecue party in the yard with very loud noise going till, I don't know, 10 or 11 at night or later. And this guy is just a total scofflaw, and it's driving me crazy having to deal with him. I've never lived where I couldn't get help from the police because there doesn't seem to be police available here. And when I've been told to call this place or call that place, hopefully somebody will be available, 99% of the time nobody's available. So I'm really quite disturbed, and I want to know what can be done.
Sorry. Luann, can I ask just for clarification this is Josh Laughlin, where your house is and what, are you in the village or?
No, I'm up on East Town Farm Road.
Okay.
Up the hill.
Thank you.
And a left turn, yeah. So, I mean, I could go into more detail about some of this stuff, but I know you folks have a lot of other stuff to do. I really need help about getting this guy to toe the line. He's just a scofflaw from the get-go.
Luann?
Yes.
Luann, this is Karen.
Hi, Karen.
So can you explain to the select board too that it's not just one house?
It's not just
barking
one house.
dog?
Oh, well, yeah.
You have issues with...
I've got issues with the dog across the road too. It's not as bad as the dog out and back, but yeah, the people across the road who years back had dogs that they kept in, they had containments for them out in their backyard, and it was never an issue. But now they have a dog that is in the front yard, and it is barking its head off a good portion of the day. And they won't do anything about it. I've called over there, I've asked, I've threatened to call the authorities. She just laughs. And the other night, when I told her husband that I was going to have to call the authorities, he just started cursing and yelling and jumping up and down. It was like, God, what is with these people? So, I mean, I'm getting no help here with dealing with dog issues and dog noise.
So that's Luann's concern, are the barking dogs. So there's 3 properties around her house. They all have dogs. One
I've never lived someplace where there weren't dog officers to just come around and help you.
Well, we had a dog officer. I explained that, and now we don't. But
well, but he never came out. He never came out. He always would tell me he was taking care of his baby.
It's a perpetual problem in this area, Luann. We have tried for years to have a successful animal control officer, and we have been in conversation with the sheriff's department about that for a long time, and we hope that might help over time, but it's a remarkably hard position to fill for a whole bunch of different reasons. Karen, do you know whether these dogs are all registered?
They're not all registered, Josh. So Aaron Pierce, who Luann mentioned, his dog is licensed. There's Kennett. Their dogs are not licensed. And then is it Vasquez?
I don't know the last name of the folks across the road, but it's Aaron and Rhiannon.
Yeah. So their dogs are not licensed Josh.
Oh, I'm sure they're not.
So what is our recourse without a dog officer at this time and unregistered
Well, we have
dogs that
Sheriff
are,
Anderson on the line with us.
that's, yes.
So, you know, unless somebody is up there physically sitting there timing the dogs barking for 15 minutes, there's really nothing we can do. I've asked Luann to make a journal and start writing, you know, when the dogs start barking, when they stop. We have to have the burden of proof. So we don't have an animal control officer or a constable that can do that.
The thing is, if I did not remember you telling me to keep a journal, but even if I kept a journal, I mean, they're just gonna say I'm lying.
So Luann, I'm going to ask that you wait to speak until I call
sorry.
on you. Thank you. No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay. I totally understand. It's harder over this medium too. Sheriff Anderson, is a journal enough to support what you need in order to follow up? Is a recording better? Like what do you need in order to be able to follow up on this?
I'm not sure I can answer that question without setting a couple foundational pieces to this. So
Okay.
with some latitude, I would like to explain the laws and the relationship my department has with the town, things that we've considered, and how we can, in the future, try to work to help resolve this. But I echo what the town manager has said. So first off, and I apologize if it looks like I'm looking off screen. I have another monitor over here where I'm referencing the law.
I can't see you. Don't worry about it.
First off, which I believe was mentioned by Luann, was noise in the nighttime. The problem with noise in the nighttime, and certainly I would have to defer to my state's attorney for a legal opinion, but the problem with it is the first words are a person who. Dogs aren't people, so I'm not entirely sure, given the owner relationship of a dog, that this law applies. And so the noise in the nighttime essentially says between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., people need to be quiet. I'm oversimplifying, but from a law enforcement standpoint, that would be the main thing that would really apply here. So the next section of law is actually the entire chapter, Chapter 8, which is the humane and proper treatment of animals. That's found in Title 13 of the Vermont statutes. And that goes on to talk about animal abuse, neglect, and issues of those nature. I won't go into the entirety of it, but this is where we handle our cruelty to animals. It's where we handle animals not having access to water. So by the very nature of an animal being left outside, we don't necessarily have a neglect issue, though there's a potential for one, and those are things that we do look into. But access to food and water, an appropriate length tether, those are often sufficient enough. And specific to the area of East Town Farm Road, my office has responded to several complaints between the hours of 5 p.m. and a little after midnight, it looks like, over the few years, regarding noise complaints and barking dogs, animal issues. So we've responded there. I lost my screen a few times. In one investigation, my deputy remained there for a period of time, I think it was about 20 minutes, and heard no barking dogs. So Karen mentioned we need a burden of proof, a recording, a sworn statement, something that we can take to court that says this is not only the complaint that we have, but because we did not witness it or observe it, this is what we're basing our finding on. That also often requires, if it's not something we've observed, it requires the person who did witness it to come to court and testify in support of it. Now, when we're discussing testifying in support of it, what we're talking about right now would be a town ordinance that says you can't have sustained barking of an animal for X period of time, whatever that number may be. And as Mr. Laughlin pointed out, we don't currently provide animal control services to the town of Putney. That was something that my predecessor exited because of some of the issues that animal control officers currently have, and so this is kind of the ongoing problem. That being said, this Friday I have a meeting with the town manager as well as another town manager to discuss how we can potentially find a solution to animal control issues where this conversation was intended to occur a while ago. COVID-19 had other plans for us. There has been a delay. It's a delay because honestly, I haven't even had time. I can't speak for Karen or anyone else, but I haven't had time to even consider animal control until I think it was Monday that we just picked this torch back up. Now, when we talk about sustained barking, one of the issues that we have with that is that sustained barking then becomes a subjective matter. And this was an issue that I believe we mentioned to the Animal Control Committee, is barking nonstop versus barking for nonstop for 30 seconds, followed by a period of a minute where they're not barking, followed by another minute of barking, followed by 10 seconds of not barking. At what point have we crossed that threshold? I'm not sure that the Vermont statutes are clear. It's been a while since we've handled animal control, and I would like to, were we to take on animal control for the town, certainly that would be a question that we would want town legal counsel to give an opinion on, because ultimately it's the town's ordinance, it's the town's legal counsel who's going to have to make the defense for the town, saying that it was in fact a legal ordinance.
Karen, I mean, our animal control ordinance is in a little bit of limbo at the moment, but even in the old ordinance, there was language about dogs barking. But we also have a noise ordinance. Is there a reference to dogs in the noise ordinance? Do you know offhand? And
If I'm remembering correctly, there is, but
you're
I
on
could
mute.
be. Karen, we don't have audio for Karen again. I'll send her a message. So if I remember correctly, and I can try and look it up real quick, it does reference dog barking.
I think it do, but you know, it's the same conversation we always have. Enforcement is the problem, and I'm not, Mark. Yeah. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. It's just amazing how frustrating it is to have all these things sort of circle around, and we have no ability to do them. And I'm not pointing a finger at you by any stretch, but that's what we need to work on. Karen,
yeah. I just sent her a message, so it's gonna.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, good. Technical difficulties tonight. So Josh, the answer to your question is we do have a draft revised ordinance that needs to go to public hearing.
Yeah.
And with the COVID, that's not going to happen. So our current animal ordinance does state a domestic pet, domestic animal, or wolf hybrid is barking, whining, calling, or howling for a continuous period of 15 minutes or more. So the exception to that rule is a kennel.
And Josh was asking about the noise ordinance as well. I'm trying to find it right now.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
or the other.
Yeah.
I mean, I think either way, we would have sort of legal standing to do something about it, but we don't have the ability to do something about it. So
I just pulled up the noise ordinance. Exhaust, excessive vehicle noise, loudspeakers, horns, signaling, radios, and other sound-producing devices, construction noise in general. I guess it would fall under noise in general.
But like Josh said, without enforcement, I wanted Mark to explain the civil citations too.
Okay.
So
if we were to write a civil citation, how does that work? Can you explain the process?
I can. I'm going to talk about the state process very quickly. I know that you're pressed for time. Anything that's written under state statute, and I'm going to use speeding tickets, for example, the town's adopted an ordinance adopting speed limits in the town, so you receive funding from the state for that. Same thing for stop signs and other types of violations. The difference is that those are all written under the state statute. If a person contests it, it goes to the state court, where the prosecutor is the officer who, or the person who issued the violation, and the defendant is the defendant. And were that to end up with a appeal, either by the state or by the defendant, the state's attorney would handle that violation on behalf of the state, and the defendant has the opportunity to represent themselves, hire legal counsel, however they want to deal with it. Municipal ordinances that aren't part of state statute is really what we're talking about. And so there's a process that the select board is required to go through to designate who the people who can issue those violations are, often constables, maybe your town manager, the fire chief, health officer. And so those people have to be specifically designated. I'm not sure if we currently are a designee for Putney. Many years ago when we were doing animal control, we were, but those are things that need to be updated. Those people are allowed to write, forgive me if I'm getting the name wrong, but I believe it's a municipal civil complaint or something to that effect. It looks very similar to the citation with some minor differences. That process, whoever is an authorized issuer of those violations, they have to obtain the specific book. The town has a specific book, and so there's only, I think we only have one book. Everybody has to write off the same ticket book. And so one of the difficulties that we found many years ago when we were doing animal control is, how do we keep track of this one book? That process may have improved. We're doing electronic citations now with the state, so there might be some improvements that we don't know yet. And those are things I'm going to look into. When we issue that violation, and this is where we're talking outside of my role, but leagues of cities and towns or town manager or your legal counsel can explain it. The select board can hold a quasi-judicial standing to hear the violations. Some towns and cities do choose to do that. Some defer to the state judicial bureau. What you do, I don't know. I'm going to talk about the judicial bureau side, which is that the tickets issued, somebody files for a hearing. The defendant will be the defendant. The officer, whoever the issuing officer was, or the town manager, the health officer, whatever, they would then be the prosecutor. What I just learned in a conversation earlier this week, which was news to me, is that if somebody does not pay the ticket, if they do nothing, there's no penalty. If you don't pay a ticket, a speeding ticket, a stop sign ticket, anything like that, what happens is your driver's license will go under suspension. If you don't pay the municipal complaint, nothing happens. And we dealt with this issue several years ago with a couple other criminal as well as civil state statutes, where we found that as people became aware of an opportunity where they don't need to pay, they just quit paying. Their license would go under suspension. They'd have the inconvenience of meeting one of my deputies, and 15 minutes later, they're on their way. Maybe with the cost of a tow bill, maybe not. So I reached out to Representative Maricki. I understand he was looking at this beforehand. I also understand that all of the representatives are incredibly busy right now with the speed of legislation, and now on top of that, trying to handle the pandemic insurance, trying to help people get paid. So I haven't heard back from him yet, but I don't hold that against him. But I want to see what the status of it is, and if that is the case, try and see how we can, if nothing else, help the towns get some teeth to their ordinances, because I really don't want to recommend that the town move to a criminal complaint. I think that that's not conducive to what we're trying to accomplish. At one point when we talked about animal control, I also mentioned the possibility of doing something like restorative justice, but I don't know if that's going to fit in this, and it'd have to be entirely voluntary at this point, which is usually what restorative justice wants anyways. So I'm happy to get information for either the Greater Falls Restorative Justice Group or the Brattleboro, I forget if it's the Brattleboro Justice Center or if there's another restorative justice group in Brattleboro.
They work under Youth Services. It's the Brattleboro Restorative Justice, I believe.
And try and gain voluntary compliance. I'm not sure if the parties in this instance are interested in participating, and writing those civil violations also becomes problematic in enforcement when, I'll say it simply, if you're not a police officer, following up on these things and dealing with the ongoing prosecutions. We receive annual training on legal updates. We submit our staff to training for testifying. It's not something you just walk in off the street and you're ready to go. And so to put other people, elected officials and or town health officers who often deal with that type of thing in that position, it's often overwhelming for them. And for us, it's Tuesday. So it makes sense for us to be able to try and help with this, but at this point, I do not believe we were designated, and that would need to be an action that the board would make to designate us.
And it sounds like even if you were designated, anything much more than a conversation really might not lead anywhere. A lot of expended energy, possibly no results. It sounds like going the legislative direction and trying to get legislative support in changing some of the rules would be helpful. Would you be willing to, since you're meeting with another town manager this week, would the three of you be willing to draft some kind of letter to our senators and representatives asking for support in this? I mean, I realize obviously, as you said, they have their hands full right now and the session is moving along really quickly, but this is an important and ongoing issue, and it's been unresolved for many communities for a long time. So
before committing to writing a letter, I think it's important to talk to Representative Maricki to find out what's happening. There might be something that's on the way already.
Okay.
There might be, so I don't know the status. I'm also, the information on the lack of teeth is based on conversations I've had with other town managers and with Karen as well. I have no experience with it because we just haven't had to issue the municipal violations since we left animal control back in, I think, 2012. So I'm happy to look into it. There might be things that we know about that are simply because we're used to getting these types of legal updates. There's a few people I can call, and so I'd like to collect more information to be able to know what we're actually trying to commit to before we write a letter without an idea of what the proposed language would be. But I mean, personally, if we could get a state statute for animal control type issues, which the town could then adopt, then you can take advantage of the teeth of the Judicial Bureau system, which comes with the license suspension should you not comply with it. So that system operates very well. There's been a lot of leniency committed as well to ensure that people who are just so far deep into they can't pay the ticket debt because of all the things that have gone on in life. And it's like, look, we're going to get them back. They'll forgive those loans or those debts and get people back on the right track by following through with various programs that have happened over the years. So it might be wise that we get a state statute that helps support these types of initiatives. It might be wise that we try and reinforce the municipality's ability to have some form of teeth to this. And it might be wise to do both.
Yeah. And I don't know that maybe I jumped to a letter too soon. I just think that bringing them into the conversation, making sure we're all in the conversation together is important. So, but I really appreciate your sense of social justice in your approach to this.
Mark, can you elaborate any more on, you said you're meeting with Karen and another manager. Do you have a sense that there, beyond those two, there's a wider appetite for animal? I mean, I know a bunch of towns need it. Are you getting people Are people interested in working with you on it, or?
Tentatively, yes, but so there's one of the hard things in building up what I'm going to refer to as a county animal control officer or a regionalized animal control officer. Pick your words. Is right now it's going to be the cost and the geography, and so there's some towns that are in different valleys that have a desire for it, and it just financially it doesn't make sense trying to get it off the ground to try and tie a framework of towns together, as opposed to if I had Westminster, Putney, Dummerston say we want to commit to a position. So we're trying to build on the geographical needs, and right now that is where we're probably going to be investing the most energy. I'm aware that including Putney, 3 towns are definitely 100% interested. That'd be Westminster and Windham. There's a couple other towns who right now it's not an issue, but it's kind of like, well, we have our animal control officer, so it's working for us right now, but we might call you back next week because everybody's been having the cycle of every 3 to 9 months, they have to find a new animal control officer. So I'm just trying to find the right timing to approach towns and say, hey, this is something we're looking at. And if we can build a model with Putney and Westminster that really works and we can demonstrate that success, I know that it's a headache for the various boards as well as the various administrators for the towns when they say we have this problem and we're being told that we're doing nothing about it, but what can we do? That's hard. I feel for Luann because she has a problem that she needs solved, which is why I'm also saying we need resources in Windham County. I mean, we have public safety has been severely undermanned forever in Windham County, and that's not the fault. It's a very realistic fact that there's a cost that's associated with public safety. But there's also a cost on the resident when it isn't here, and this is just one example.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything aside from asking Luann to document or record that we can do to be supportive of her at this time?
Recordings are ideal because we can say this is timestamped. Civil violations, the burden of proof of them is more likely than not. And so what that means is that we essentially have to show that there's a 51% chance that whatever happened. So having a log is useful in terms, or a journal, as Karen mentioned, is useful for us in terms of an investigatory capacity. Like, hey, it's every Friday night that I'm barking. We now know Friday nights, this is maybe something between these times we can look at. We do the same thing for suspicious vehicles. There's 15 cars that come in and out of that driveway Tuesday at 2 a.m. and it's really weird. Well, write down the plates or the times or description of the vehicle, and we can use that information to develop patterns. Recordings are ideal. A journal certainly will help us get to a point where we could be physically present to witness it ourselves, which then minimizes some of the burden on trying to prove the case. Again, the hard part is a continuous 15 minutes of barking. If I hear bark, bark, bark for the next 5 minutes and then silence for 30 seconds, now has that burden not been met? And again, I need to reach that 51% line. It's tough. In my experience, we have been, in the time that we did animal control, we're very rarely successful in successfully prosecuting a sustained barking complaint because that's what would happen.
Is it helpful if there's more than one person in the neighborhood that's being annoyed by it and they're keeping multiple logs? And does that support you in trying to prosecute this? And I want to ask Luann after this, is there anybody else in your community, your neighborhood there that's bothered by this that could either help you in the community or help Sheriff Anderson if he had to do something about it or could do something about it?
Are you asking me that now?
I'm asking both of you, 2 questions to each of you.
Oh.
So, Mark, you go.
Why don't you go, Luann, why don't you go first?
Okay.
Is there somebody else?
there is no one else within, sound range here. The only other people near me are a bit of a ways downhill from me, and then quite a ways on the other end.
Okay.
And so that, yeah, I'm kind of stuck here with somebody behind me and across the street, and it's very frustrating. I mean, I was planning on selling the house anyway, but I was hoping maybe there was some kind of help while I have to, get the place ready to put on the market. So I guess there isn't.
So it seems like it's a moot point for Luann, but would it help, Mark, Sheriff Anderson?
So potentially, having 6 people say the dog's been barking for 15 minutes is far better than me saying, well, I have the testimony of one person who says the dog's barking for 15 minutes, and I have the testimony of the defendant saying, no, it barked like twice, and then 10 minutes later it saw a squirrel, and that's how they're calling it 15 minutes. So sometimes having people, multiple people support with what I'll refer to as a similar narrative, doesn't have to be the exact same experience, but a similar narrative of like, this is the pattern that they're seeing is useful. The other problem, very specific to the context of Luann's case, is that if there's, I think she said 3 houses where there's a barking dog, well, now we have to identify which dog is barking, and it might be the dueling banjos effect, so to speak, that dog 1 barks, that causes dog 2 to bark, that causes dog 3 to bark, and we don't have sustained barking from the animal. It's round robin. Now, I don't know that that's the case. I personally haven't heard it. And certainly I can understand the frustration that Luann would have from that amount of time, but this is where we come into a difficulty of me having to witness the dog barking, and looking at the geographic nature, that could be hard for me to prove which dog it is without having a task force of deputies up there to figure out which dog's barking at which point. So this becomes quickly resource intensive because while sound is considered witnessing of an act, we have to be able to affirm that it was dog A or dog B or dog C that was in fact the one that was barking. And we don't even know if it could be dog A and dog B at house 1 that are.
I can tell the difference between the dog that's behind me and the one that's across the street. It's quite dear. I mean, they sound very different. And the one across the street is brought in at night, whereas the one behind me is not brought in at night, which is when I have the majority of my problem with it.
So it's the way I explain this is that what we know and what we can prove. And so while we can know that it's the dog across the street, and we know that because we heard it barking from across the street, and we know that it's the dog barking behind your house, and we know it's the dog 3 that's then barking. My staff would have to be able to testify that they are 100% confident that it was dog 3 that was barking, and then defendant comes with a recording of their 2 dogs that are going back and forth, and now we can't. We have an issue where we would be considered perjuring ourselves. So deputies don't want to be put in a position where they're potentially at risk of losing their job for lying under oath. They don't want to affirm that, well, I know it was dog 3, not dog 2. And that's where proof becomes even harder, especially if dogs are inside and we don't know how many dogs an owner has. So these noise or barking dog ordinances are incredibly fickle. They are hard to enforce, they are hard to investigate, and they're very easy to witness. That's the difficulty.
I've lived a lot of.
Luann, I'm sorry. Luann, I have to interrupt you. We do have to end this portion of the meeting. Does anybody, Karen, do you have any further questions for Sheriff Anderson regarding enforcement or lack thereof? Does anybody else on the select board have any questions?
I just want to make sure, Karen, when you meet with Sheriff Anderson on Friday, he was referring to us giving the authority to have them follow up on things. Can we make sure we've done that if we haven't? I mean, I don't think it'll do us any good in this instance, but it would be too bad if it was an instance where it would do us good and we hadn't granted the authority. So let's just make sure we do.
And I want to add, Luann, I'm sure sorry for the problems that you're having and that we can't be more supportive at this time, but we just don't have the law really behind our back on this one at this time, and that's it's just the way it is, unfortunately. So
thank you for listening.
No problem. Sheriff Anderson, before you take off, I just wanted to ask if you would reiterate we were in a phone conversation with legislators on Saturday, and the question came up, and this is a little off topic, I apologize to everybody, but I think it's important that it goes out publicly. The question came up regarding if people believe that people are congregating in a way that they shouldn't be at this time, or they're breaking social distancing orders, what should they do, and what is it that you would do? And I felt like you gave a really great explanation on that. And if you could just repeat that.
I'd be happy to, and I need to caveat that today is a perfect example of why I gave the answer I gave on Saturday, because today Executive Order 13 came out. And so what people can do, to cut to the chase real quick, the Department of Public Safety on their website, I believe it's dps.vermont.gov, they have a reporting tool. The point of that is not, some states have been calling them the rat line, so to speak. It's not that, it's to try and reduce resources to answer the abundant flow of complaints about people violating social distancing. What that form does in its entirety, it collects data so that the governor can make actionable efforts with information that he's receiving, similar to the AOT workers sitting on the state lines, just counting cars. But that information goes from the Department of Public Safety to the responsible law enforcement agency for that area to determine how to respond with it. So that's method number one. Method number two, call my office. What we're not out trying to write everybody a ticket when they're inadvertently violating an executive order. It's an incredibly fluid situation, and so what our goal is to try and educate and gain voluntary compliance with the executive orders as they come out. It's hard for people to stay on top of it if they're not employed to stay on top of it. And some people don't even know where to look. So our goal is to try and educate people. Our experience has been that a majority of Vermonters are law-abiding. They are trying to follow the executive orders. There's confusion, there's misinformation. Social media has been both good and bad things in terms of communicating what's going on. And so we're trying to communicate with authority that, hey, this is what the current executive order is. Now, today, for people who haven't read Executive Order 13, there is an additional loosening of restrictions. And so now play dates with a trusted home. And so what a trusted home is a home that you know that people are following the social distancing guidelines. It's basically, let's try and have a little social interaction. Let's start relieving some of the burden on families, but let's not go to every single person's home. Let's pick a family that I call my quarantine family. Pick a family that you can be exposed to each other, have that social aspect. We still encourage maintaining people are still needing to maintain the 6 feet distance, but we're trying to help people see that we can start to pick back some normality of life while still maintaining a healthy distance from each other, because we don't know who carries the virus and we don't know what 10 people they're going to see next that could cause somebody to get horribly sick and or kill them. So when we explain that our goal is that, and we explain that you could be the person killing someone else's grandmother, and this is why it just makes sense, and we explain the science behind it, we find compliance. So There is a process in terms of enforcement, and I do like to make clear that if somebody calls my office and one of my deputies responds, and then they see us just drive away, it's not that we're doing nothing, it's that we're responding to things that are violations in mere seconds that have a multi-day process behind how we deal with what I'll refer to as the enforcement component. Education is the first step, and trying to gain that compliance. Sometimes people just made a mistake because they weren't thinking. If we find willful or malicious violations of it, we contact the Attorney General's office. They have a process which includes both civil and criminal penalties. Their goal is to not do this. We all want to support people's constitutional rights to do things. We just want to do it in a way that doesn't get a lot of people sick.
Uh-oh, Laura. I don't know what happened. Okay.
Hold
It
on.
should be good now. There you go.
The one, the one that keeps coming up for me is Airbnbs. And I have any authority, but folks keep reaching out to me to let me know that like I saw a Massachusetts plate at an Airbnb, and then I try to walk them through, well, so that could be a essential personnel coming in from another state. Like there are reasons that Airbnbs can be occupied right now. And so let's not jump to conclusions. And if you have concerns, reach out to local law enforcement. But
another thing on Airbnbs, the DPS reporting link specifically has an area that deals with reporting those things. So I would encourage you to focus people towards those. The Department of Public Safety, as well as local law enforcement, has processes for not only speaking with Airbnb directly to say, like, you can't do this, but there's always a way around various restrictions. And some people resorted to other websites to try and continue pushing their vacation rentals. So we are investigating those. We are dealing with those. And the other thing with those, with Airbnbs and VRBOs and whatnot, is I'm not sure if this has actually been effectuated yet. However, I believe the governor's administration was actually looking at using Airbnbs for not only essential personnel, but also as relief for homeless. As shelters and hotels fill up with homeless populations, utilizing Airbnb capacity to help the vacation home industry be able to support themselves, but also help our homeless communities to be safe. One of the biggest struggles at the very beginning of this was, how do we keep people who don't have the luxury of a home to maintain social distance when they need to rely on each other to survive? So right now, the Brattleboro, I say the Brattleboro district office has over 100 people that are currently housed in hotels. There's vouchers available, general assistance vouchers. If your communities are aware of people that need some sort of assistance, I don't know who the designee for that is, but certainly I'd be happy to help connect them.
they should go through, this is actually my day job. They should go through 211, and they will get help that way. They'll get an intake through 211. So
sure. I learned something.
Oh, I just lost you all on the screen. Oh, now you're back. Okay. Karen, did you want Sheriff Anderson in for the rest of this conversation, or do you feel like the only other thing that we had in here that I feel like we didn't cover was dog licensing, and that's really just going over. What's that?
Right. No, I think we're good with him.
Okay. Does anybody else?
We can release him now.
Yeah. Thank you for your exceptional patience through this.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. I'm happy to help.
All right. It was really appreciated. So take care. Stay safe.
You as well. Take care.
All right.
All right. Let me get him. Okay, he's gone. Oh.
All right. I will, we had dog licensing on here. It came up recently through a community forum that folks were feeling, or some folks were feeling a little perturbed that they're paying licensing fees and that we have no enforcement. And so I just wanted to point out that of the licensing fees that we collect, $5 of every fee goes to the state. And then I'm sorry, I've lost my paperwork because we've talked so much. Ah, bear with me. Anybody want to take a stretching break while I?
I mean, I think one of the values of licensing is the fact that there's a registry of dogs that have
Yeah.
rabies, which
Right.
Yeah. So
there's
that's
value in that alone.
absolutely. But you know, in paying that licensing fee, 300 of what we collect goes right into the cost of tags. We have to maintain an annual contract with the Windham County, not with the Windham County Humane Society, but that is who we choose, and that's $831 a year. And I'm sorry, that's 786. And then we also contribute to them through social services. They're a third tier in our social services. So we contribute 831 to them. By the time it's all said and done, between the contract to them, the cost of tags, and the social services, we as a town are already paying out more towards supporting the animals in our community than we're getting back in licensing fees. So just so everybody understands, we're not like making bank off these licensing fees and not doing anything with it. Anything that goes beyond to an animal control officer is really beyond that. It's not, they're not linked together.
Yeah. We might be able to, in fact, close that gap if everybody who had a dog licensed them.
Maybe.
Yeah. So just to comment on that, so back on April 9th, I had reports from Jonathan, and there were 121 dogs that are unlicensed. We don't know how many dogs that were never licensed in town. And we have 168 dogs that are licensed.
Yeah. And of the licensed ones, we're not covering our needs as far as supporting animals. Oh, but Josh, you make a good point. If every single dog that lived in town was licensed, we probably could go
maybe break even anyway.
Yeah, right. So, I think the animal ordinance public hearing, Karen, that was already covered in the conversation, wasn't it? Or did you have more on
because
that?
of COVID, we can't really have a public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it would have to be like outdoors. I would imagine there would be quite a few people there. So, given we already have an ordinance intact, but the Animal Advisory Board did spend a lot of time on revising the ordinance. You know, it was well over a year. And we'd like to see it, you know, brought to the people and get comment on it. And given what Mark Anderson just spoke about, you know, does it make sense that we, you know, go by a state regulation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because with a town ordinance, our town ordinance would be in effect first. And then the state, anything that we don't have in the regulation, the state, you know, would cover, but
It's still, you know, broken record. It's still an enforcement issue. It doesn't, you know, I mean, not that we shouldn't have the ordinance. We absolutely should. And I very much appreciate the work that's gone into it. And I would love to something sooner rather than later, but it really doesn't mean squat without being able to enforce it, unfortunately.
And I actually think it has a lot more teeth in the revised version. And
Yes.
I'd like to see it, you know, get adopted.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm excited to see about the direction that you and Sheriff Anderson are taking, Karen, and hopefully something comes of that. We're able to get legislative support going down the road.
Yeah.
All
I'd like
right.
to comment about that if I could, just really quickly. It seems
Yeah.
like, and I have very little experience at this. I've luckily never had neighbors I couldn't work things out with, and ultimately, from my experience in youth when Bill Graham was sheriff, the thing that was most effective was a visit from somebody who had teeth in their personality and came into the situation and basically said, look, you need to do something about this. And in no way am I saying let's not have an ordinance. Yes, let's have an ordinance. Yes, let's have rules. Yes, let's try to figure out some kind of ticketing and enforceability, but let's have somebody when they step on the property and say, look, you need to quiet your dog down. Whoever has the dog listens to it.
Yeah.
Because that is going to be the thing that actually gets the job done.
Yeah.
I don't know how we get that. We can't even get anybody to take the job, say nothing about the right person to take the job.
Right.
No.
Well, hopefully the conversations that Karen's having with Sheriff Anderson, we can end up doing something as a group of towns together. That's, I think, possibly our best direction, but.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. Emergency management preparedness update, farmers market discussion guidance. Do we have anybody on the call for this, Karen?
No, we do not.
Okay. Do you
Do you want to wait till next week?
just thinking in terms of time, I'm thinking, I think that these are important conversations to have. What is the timeline on the farmers market opening, our outdoor business concerns? I think the outdoor business maybe we should address right now, at least minimally.
Yeah, because it may cover the other two.
Okay. All right. So maybe let's talk about the outdoor business. It was brought up this week that, as businesses are reopening and starting to serve the public, that people are traveling to Putney again to partake, and that's wonderful. We want that on so many levels, and at the same time, we want to be sure that it's done safely, and that people are educated when they're coming into our town as to how to do that safely. So Karen and I were talking about how do we help support safest practices within the community and support our businesses at the same time. And is that a matter of some signage that reminds people of what safe practices are, and what is needed when you're coming into the town of Putney? What does that look like for us? Do we do some kind of town educational campaign to both support our businesses in functioning and ensure that folks coming into town and folks coming out of their homes that already live in town are encouraged to practice best precautions?
Do we need to buy a bunch of sandwich boards?
All the sandwich boards, David. I think I said this at another meeting. We need all the sandwich boards.
I wonder, I think we need to be doing this as much as we can. As I've expressed before with things along these lines, our ability to message significant numbers of people is limited. And I wonder actually whether Putney Mutual Aid might be almost better equipped for this than we are.
It's a piece of why the conversation's coming up.
Yeah. I saw somewhere the other day, and this may be cliche at this point, I don't know, but I really like the image of staying one cow's length apart.
Yeah.
And I don't know whose image that is and who's using it and whether we can, but a creative sign with a cow's length, is humorous and friendly, and might be worth doing. Exactly.
Yeah,
So,
it is all over Vermont right now. I believe it's a Vermont thing. So,
I don't know where origin was, but I think we could adopt it.
yeah. So, and in thinking about that, I agree that Putney Mutual Aid maybe are working with them to try and implement something that is around different areas in the town, like different entrances. So, thinking in terms of like at the community garden and coming south on Route 5, and maybe Harlow's would be willing to work with us to put something up there. So it was just a conversation that Karen and I felt was important to have. As regulations are loosening and spring is really springing, and so I like the idea of cow signs. Josh, do you have plywood, and are you artistic?
He's a builder.
Yes. Time.
No, you don't have time. Do your kids have time? Would they?
I wouldn't mind. I'm trying to think. I wonder. Putney School might have some cow things around. I can explore that a little bit.
Okay, cool. Do you want to cover the farmers market discussion? I think it's important too to have the farmers market in on this. I would love to hear what they're doing before we dive into what our concerns are.
I agree with you, and given that, I think they need to be in the conversation as well.
And I may be off, but it's my assumption that there isn't a farmer's market scheduled for probably at least several weeks. Is there?
Yeah. I don't believe so. I think we can safely put this conversation off and ask for them to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's table that.
I mean, the state has come up with clear guidelines, so I don't know whether we would just adopt those or how we would work it. I also, just from hearing farmer friends talking about it, they are definitely working on protocols. It's just going to really change the nature of a farmer's market. So
yeah, I have faith in them to.
I do too, definitely.
But Karen, I thought you brought it to me that we actually have to approve something. Was that correct, or am I mistaken?
No, it just states that in the governor's executive order, addendum 11, regarding farmers market, it states effective May 1st, 2020, farmers markets may open using limited in-person operations to ensure consumer access to quality, healthy food. Farmers markets must adhere to all municipal ordinances and regulatory and permitting requirements prior to opening. So we do not have an ordinance on farmers market, but Josh, being that it's private property, would the landowner be responsible?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Give guidance?
I'll find out. I don't know. They carry insurance, but I'm given pandemic, who knows? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I would also guess, and I don't think we in any way want to go down this route, but I would guess that if we chose as a municipality to not allow a farmer's market this year, we probably could do that. I don't think we should do that, but I do think we encourage it to be as, sort of well organized as it can be.
Yeah. And I think because we have a platform and having that conversation with them would be helpful for them as well, because we have a platform. So it would get the word out on what they're doing. So David, I'm sorry, you were going to say.
Totally fine. It strikes me that these are the kind of people that will be so good at being compliant.
Yeah.
That this is, I'm sure they've already thought of this.
Yeah.
You know, because of the risk of not being able and the financial detriment of not being able to have the farmers market, I guarantee you they've thought about it.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to Marissa. I haven't talked to Howie. I haven't talked to Linda, in a week, so I don't know. But they were talking about this 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they've worked really hard to do as much order and pickup as possible and
Yeah.
as much PSA as possible. So if it isn't people coming in from out of town, chances are good it's going to be pretty orderly and not too much to worry about. And I'm not saying don't have the conversation. Of course, have the conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd want to help with the cow signs. So
Maybe.
I'm really loving those cow signs.
I think
So
I think the governor's guidelines for farmers markets are pretty clear and detailed, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And I would almost like adopt them, but
Yeah.
I don't think we need to. I think we should have the conversation with the farmers market and see how they're going to proceed. And again, it's like the sheriff said. I mean, somebody may not be 6 feet apart, but they're not going to write a ticket to each person. So I think as we come out too, people aren't going to be thinking about distance right off, and
I will.
after a while it'll become normal.
I will say I did get off the mountain here for today for the first time in a very long time and drove to Brattleboro. I had to get some medicine for my mom, and there was an outdoor food cart truck, and there was a dozen people lined up elbow to elbow in line.
Oh, that's
To
too
get in
bad.
there. Only one of them had a mask on. And this was in Brattleboro. And I won't say any names. And I just thought, the first thought I had was, oh boy, I wouldn't want to be in that line. And, I thought, I get the feeling there's some combination of, people being so starving for socialization and just feeling like because we've done a reasonably good job at distancing and keeping our numbers low compared to other places, they're not taking it seriously. So with that said, on the heels of me saying that I think we have a pretty educated group of people that would be running farmers markets, who knows, maybe we would have a problem. I don't, what would we do with that besides educate people? So,
the other thing that we're definitely witnessing around the country, and I haven't heard of anything locally, but these disagreements about this kind of stuff are becoming pretty explosive. So we want to be
right.
Try and keep people as level-headed as possible as well.
Yeah. I will say that as someone that's navigating the human-y world an awful lot right now, maybe a little bit more than I want to be some days, most days, I see very different levels of respect and
Absolutely.
in surprising places. So it's it's varied. There are times that I'm in a grocery store and I would say 98% of the people have masks on, and then there are times when it's more like 15%. And so it's just where you are and when, and who the people you happen to be around, how they feel about it. And I've heard a lot of different feedback on the way the governor is rolling this out, and I think that we have to try and hold all of it together. Like, yes, the economy is important, and so is people's health, and the best that we can do is take care of ourselves well and encourage everybody to do the same without getting overly heated about it, because that doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
All right, library protocol curbside service. That's exciting.
I spoke to Emily to see what her plan is, and she met with the board. So they're going to open just for curbside service. starting Wednesday next week. And Emily will be the only one at the library. For right now, they're going to loan books out with, no date for return. And then, as the restrictions are lifted, they'll figure out a protocol. She's still a little nervous. She's going to work with Tom too about how to open, how many people. She's working with the state libraries too. So they all seem to be accumulating steps to put in place so they can, stay safe and healthy, but also sanitize. Because no one knows how long this is going to last.
Yeah.
And, as we know, there's probably more people walking around with the virus that don't know it. So, so she's working on that, and she'll keep us posted too. And I've invited her to, come into an emergency preparedness meeting at any point if she wanted to update the board.
Great. Are they considering an ultraviolet light for the books? Do you know?
No, and Jonathan looked into that for the land records. And so basically you're going to have, for paper, like his book, 40 minutes.
Oh,
the book would have to be under the ultraviolet for like 40 minutes. And that might damage the pages. So the land records, it's not going to work. Emily hasn't mentioned, ultraviolet, but, she also stated that it hasn't been proven that, the virus will live on paper.
Even if it lives, its degradation matters. So you can find live virus, and that doesn't mean it's contagious to you any longer.
It also, my understanding is with paper in particular that timeline is relatively short. I mean, somewhere in the range of 24 to 48 hours. So I would think, given that, and I'm certainly no expert, but that if she had books coming in, they could be put in a certain place for, 3 days or 4 days, and they'd be safe.
Right.
Book quarantine.
I'm sure the librarians, the state librarian group is looking into it, but.
No, talk about thorough people, and people that are good at research.
Right.
All right. Any other questions about that? Great.
Nope.
Highway Department dump out.
Oh, I hope we don't lose you,
Karen,
Laura.
is this?
Laura, look at us.
Laura?
Are you losing me? Oh, I have a.
You were breaking up.
I had poor quality for a second there. So, or am I still gone?
No, you're back.
What was your question?
I can hear you. No, the Highway Department dump truck with dump body quote. We're moving on.
Right. So in your packet, I sent you the quotes for the 2021 dump truck that was voted on at town meeting. Now, if you like, I can get Brian on the phone, or we can just discuss it.
Is this,
we
Get that.
Go ahead, Laura.
So I feel like at our last meeting, we had discussed the potential of of putting these things off for a time while we take a look at the books. Is this something that we're still moving forward on business as usual, or are we going to take a beat?
So I know we talked about the fire engine and the dump truck, but I had asked both Tom and Brian to continue with the process to get the bids. We would look at the interest rate, and then we would decide, okay? So for the dump truck, for the truck and the dump body, the total price is $192,055, and there's a trade-in value of $23,500, which brings the financing down to $168,555. So I reached out to the bank today, just one bank, People's, and I said, hypothetically speaking, I said, we want to borrow this much money for 5 years, starting, fiscal year 21 in the fall. What is the interest rate on the loan? She came back with a 2.5% interest rate, which that's not bad. Anything under 3 is really good. So I'm surprised that it's still that low. I also spoke to Brian, and I said, Brian, is there any way we could keep this truck another year or two? And he's like, probably not this particular one, because they use it as a chloride truck during the summer. So the chloride goes in, they put it on the roads for dust. And of course, it's corrosive, the metal. So I asked Brian, I said, okay, so if you look at the truck, can you tell me specifically what it would need and possibly what the cost would be? So he gave me a list. He said the dump body is very rusty from years of being the chloride truck. It needs a new conveyor chain. It's about $1,800 plus or minus. We'll need new front and rear springs, $5,000. Needs new tires, $3,500. Last winter we put new steering linkage in it, and we were told that it needs new kingpins on front end, $3,000 plus or minus. Fuel tank brackets are bad. Tank doesn't look great. We are getting very good value for this truck, and I think paying less money than last year for a 10-wheeler. So the total cost right now is about $20,100 to put in to maintain it.
So I'm sorry. Are you still going, Karen? I'm sorry.
No, you can go ahead, David.
So in light of the fact that uncertain future financially, considering the crisis, and we don't know what funding would dry up and where we're going to land, have we asked Brian, is there any way he can function without this truck for a year? And is there a way to use another truck to do the chloride? What else does he use this truck for? Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you, David. Yes. And I want to add to that. This may be a somewhat ignorant question, but do we have to do chloride? I mean, how dusty does dusty get? Like,
it gets pretty bad. We haven't always done chloride. There have been times when we haven't. Back in the good old days, we just used old motor oil.
Let's not do that.
No.
Exactly what I will tell you. So,
yeah. It's pretty darn useful as a tool in their box, definitely. I think that along the lines of sort of David's questioning, I mean, well, I don't know where David was headed with that, but if we have a designated chloride truck per se, that's probably not the one to choose to hang on to in general.
Right.
And if it is really sort of the chloride truck and it is really rusty, I'm surprised they're offering us $23,500 in trade-in on it. But how does that how does that 20,000-ish you said that it needs, Karen, compared to the annual payments on it?
Well, so the payments, oh, I wish I didn't have my phone being used like this. Can somebody take 168,555 and divide it by 5?
Are you on that, Josh?
I had
see
the
you.
numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
32,000.
That'll be the yearly payment.
Not including interest.
Right, it's 2.5% interest.
Right?
Yeah, 33.7 is what it comes to, or
Yeah,
30.
that sounds about right.
And then interest. I mean, 2.5% interest is low. But the other thing I would be really interested to know, and I mean, my feeling is we should table this decision. The other thing I would be really interested to know is if somebody could give us a reasonably accurate estimate of what that truck will be worth in a year, or maybe even 2 years.
On what Josh is saying, I wanted this afternoon, and I planned on actually going over to the highway department and looking at it myself and get a look for it, and actually talk to Brian for a second and see if thinking along your lines or part of the way we think about how we can cut back, multiple uses for a truck so that one can be taken, not used so much, and postpone spending anything, on a new truck for at least a year until we see how this falls out.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
There's no vote on this. This is just information for the select board.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So maybe David does his research and has a conversation, and we come back to this.
Yep.
Yeah, and I certainly want it to be clear that we aren't, or I'm not trying to second guess Brian's judgment.
Right.
I just think we all have to look at things differently in light of where we are. And I think Brian has excellent judgment about this kind of stuff. But maybe this is a year in which you say, you know what, this is what I really would love to do, but maybe we're just not going to do it this year. And I think we all have in that way. So.
Yep, I agree with that, Josh. I love that line of thinking.
And I think Brian's
right now. Yep.
Yeah. Brian's judgment is also framed in a different place than maybe, like, historically as a town we've been very supportive of this. So it's a different conversation now and a different framework. And
and I think part of that framework needs to be that it's teamwork, that it's not us not getting him the truck that he thinks that he should have now, even if that's the financial best decision if things were in a normal place. This is teamwork. We're all going to have to start thinking differently about how to support the system as things change, and we need to get him and Tom in on that so that there's no adversarial position here. That's not what this is. So
I can get him on the phone if that's what you would like me to do.
I think we can hold off on that tonight. I have confidence in David approaching him, and I think everybody's on the same page on this.
Yep.
Yep. And I trust Brian too. I mean,
he knows,
of course.
And and he was willing to call in tonight anyway if there was any questions for him.
Well, that's sure appreciated. But
I think it's great. I think it's great that David will talk to him one-on-one. And I think that's the way the select board should be, we're a team, like you said, David.
The only caveat to that would be if there's a timeline on either the bid or the borrowing, we should pay attention to that. And I'm guessing neither of those are going to shift dramatically quickly, but it is something we should just have in the back of our mind if they exist.
Can I ask
September. September, Josh, is usually
Oh,
when we get a
that's-
new truck.
Can I ask another question? Do we know that there's any resources that won't be coming our way? Or do we already know that as states and the feds get challenged, do we know funding that we're used to getting is already drying up? Is there any information? Do we have any?
It's starting to come down, David.
It'd be nice to know that kind of stuff.
My guess about that would be that largely what that would be grant money.
It is grant money.
That, those are the first things to go because they're voluntary programs. So, I'm sure there will be more than that. The other area I know they're looking hard at, but we have no control over it, is education.
Yeah. And Karen already mentioned in a previous conversation that the sidewalk funding, the bicycles and pathways.
Yeah. The
They've
V-Trans bicycle and pedestrian grant program has been put on hold.
I'm sure.
State of Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean,
has.
Yeah.
It has. So
It already has happened.
I would guess along with that, if they haven't yet, all the sort of typical, whether it's VHCB or I'm blanking on the Vermont downtowns. There's a lot of them that rely almost entirely on federal pass-through grant money for distribution of funds, but again, they're voluntary. So I don't think there will be, other than education, which again we have no control over. I don't think there will be specifics. Probably, maybe highway money. I don't know, but that's pretty stable. That's typically pretty stable money, though. I mean, the
not now.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I know. I'm saying typically it is, but maybe not.
Because the state is going to lose revenue. They're already losing revenue.
Yeah.
So those funds, they're not going to come down to the municipalities.
Right.
And that's what's going to impact us.
Yeah. And while we're having this conversation, let's put another plug in for people to do the census. Our census numbers are still abysmally low, and census is a big part of how we receive funding. Yeah. So please go online if you're able to and fill out the census. It's so easy.
So I just want to end this by saying, because I'm new at this, it sounds like it behooves us to be careful and not make commitments until we have as much information as possible, keeping in mind what Josh was saying about deadlines, trying to learn what we can learn before we make any commitments.
Agreed.
So, I totally agree with that.
From what I've been reading in the last 2 weeks on studies of the financial health of towns in the state of Vermont over the last 5 years, and what I've been reading about survivability and thriving for businesses during and after financial downturns, that the best thing you can do is keep your assets as liquid as possible, and to have as little, be leveraged as little as possible, so that your options to spend in the way that benefits, your organization as much as possible is the best thing to do. So with that in mind, I'll have the conversation with Brian and do my best.
We've certainly, whether we've directly said it or not, we're all aware that there's a likelihood that our tax receipts are going to be challenged at a minimum this year. How dramatic that is and how long it plays out for, who knows? But it's going to be a reality. I think we all are aware.
Absolutely. No. All right. Well, on that note, the 2020 final cash flow report, Windham Southeast School District overpayment.
In your packet, I had sent you the final cash flow report for 2020. and the town of Putney has overpaid the school district. Overpaid them by $76,827.71. So I've been meaning to get a hold of Frank Rucker or Laura Barkham, who has now taken Ike's place, to see when we will get the refund, because that's important to have in our account before the end of the fiscal year. And it's going to help our cash flow too. So my question is, and Maura, you might be able to answer this because you were on the school board, but it is state education. The fact that we overpaid by $76,000, which is taxpayers' money, I don't know how that's a big number to me.
That's a big number.
How did they figure their formulas? Because that's $76,000 that the taxpayers would have had in their pocket, you know? So how do we tighten that gap?
Oh, I wasn't on the school board long enough to explain that to you.
No.
I'm not sure that I could be on the
shaking
school
my
board for
head.
10 years and explain that to you.
You know,
It's a pretty convoluted process, Karen.
Yeah.
But if it was $20,000, I could see that. But
Yeah.
$76,000 is a big number. And
That is
Feels
a
you
like
know,
good we overpaid.
Yeah.
Better than underpaid.
and maybe
Yeah.
right. I don't really want to pay the school district, but you know,
So,
I mean, 76,000 is a big number.
It is.
yeah, although when you look at it relative to I mean, what was the total amount we paid out for education last year? 3.3 million, something like that. You know, I'm not saying it's a small number, but percentage-wise, it's not massive. But also, it seems to me that a lot of stuff from the state education funding aspects sort of became revealed in the last year that question how all of this stuff works. And I think we're seeing an example of, well, maybe it's not quite an exact science as they might like it to be. Some years you do better and some years you do worse. This year, thankfully, we did better. The other thing I would ask, and it makes no difference to me, I mean, it sounds like a check would be great because it would help us with cash flow. Is there any rationale for just rolling it over towards next year's?
That's a good question.
Well, we don't even have a budget yet, so I mean, I would rather not do that. I just soon wait. We can also, when it comes to our tax rate, so Frank had a number that he had put in the school report of 1.77, and I'm willing to use that number, knowing that the state will come down with a different number, but it's going to be close. So I would rather have our money back, and I don't know if we can actually just roll it into next year's. I have no idea how that would work, or if it can even be done.
Yeah.
Well,
Are we any closer to, I'm sorry, David, are we any closer to having a school budget? Like that's,
No.
how are they going to resolve that?
I don't know. I've been having Jonathan contact the district, but they still don't have a plan yet.
Yikes.
Well, the comment I was going to make is, being a cheap Yankee, I'm always happier when it's in my account than when it's in somebody else's. Always.
Right.
And considering the way of the world right now, I'm even happier in our account. So
yeah, no, I wasn't advocating for that necessarily. I just didn't know. You know, sometimes they will encourage that, and in fact, I don't know in this realm, but you know, sometimes there's a carrot attached to it. If you,
well, that's different. That's different.
I don't know, you know, but.
Oh.
But I agree. I'd rather have the carrot than the stick if that's what it boils down to. So.
Yeah.
The fixed amount,
Yep.
if it's a known amount right now, that seems like a good amount to us. And if we get it and then something changes and it turns out, oh, we didn't overpay by 76, we overpaid by 46. Oh, whoops. Wouldn't it have been great to get the check for 76? And
Right.
even if we owe the 30, you know.
All right. Well, how about we get a town
Well, I'm
clerk's
gonna
office
ask for the
update?
check.
Oh, sorry. Were you not done?
No.
I'm hitting my witching hour.
I know, right?
I did it an hour ago.
8:30.
It's 8:37, Karen.
Is Alyssa still with us?
I see her. I see her A.
Yep.
I'm sure,
Yep.
sure she's not pleasantly surprised by all this.
Hmm.
No. So moving on.
Moving on, town clerk's office update.
So I asked Jonathan for an update from the town clerk's office, and we already spoke about the elections and how people can go online and request an absentee ballot. And we're trying to encourage, he's trying to encourage everyone to please vote, because we don't know what it's going to look like in August. So go online, get registered. If you need an absentee, just contact the office. You can email Jonathan or call him, and he will get them out to you. Let's see. He's working with Tom, too, about a location for August. So it might be the park and ride. So that's in the works, too. Digital land records. So
Are we considering
What was that?
drive-through voting?
Is that what I'm hearing?
yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. Yep. Drive-through voting with a couple tents. Hopefully it'll be nice. We'll have to make it work. You know, the school is another option for August, because the parking lot's going to be empty and it'll be large enough where you could actually have circular motion up there.
Yeah, and they have a horseshoe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that might be more realistic right there. So we'll keep you guys posted on that. Digitizing the land records, as we all know through this crisis, it is very important to start researching that. Jonathan's made some phone calls. He's got a couple companies, no prices yet confirmed. He also had a company come in to look at the surveys, all the plans that are in the land records, to have them scanned as well and digitized, you know, so people can go online and get them if they need to. They haven't come back with any information, so he's going to follow up with them. So between digitizing the land records and the survey and getting them online, I think that's a first step. And he does have that restoration fund, too, that he can use that money to do both of these projects.
All right. Allocation of sewer and water for Mockingbird Tavern?
Yeah. So I know this came up and it didn't get on the agenda because I just got the information on Monday. So J.D. McClemont's old place has a new owner. So they converted the shed into a dwelling, and they were going to hook the water and sewer up to that building, municipal water and sewer. They have a well on the property,
Mm-hmm.
and the restaurant was never hooked up to water. It's just hooked up to sewer.
Mm-hmm.
So in talking with the engineer and Chris Hayes with Simon's Operations, they've decided to hook the restaurant up to municipal water and take the dwelling and put it on the well.
So little history here. We'd have to, I don't know exactly how we would do this, but it was a complicated discussion clarifying to them when they didn't hook up to water that did not then keep their reservation, because they haven't been making bond payment, I don't believe. So
you're absolutely correct on that.
So, in theory, there's a pretty good whack attached to that, because this was the whole reason that the system was figured the way it was. So I just want to, however we choose to do it is fine. But there were many hours of discussion related to them getting off of the water system or never connecting to it when they had agreed, or when somebody had agreed previously to attach to it. So,
okay, can I just state that I did find the legal documentation when the select board decided to release them from the reservation, and I forget what year it was. It was a while ago.
2011, probably.
It might have been earlier than that.
Somewhere in
I'm
there.
thinking 2009-ish. But
Maybe.
anyway, so
Jess, you've been on the board
Given-
forever.
I want to say thank you right there. I want
Thank
to say
you.
thank you.
Yes, thank you for that
Nice
enormous amount of knowledge.
to show a little bit.
Josh, given that the select board released the restaurant from that reservation, right? Why would the new owner have to pay all that back? It's not the new owner's fault that the select board chose to release them.
Yeah, I don't know, but this is the reason. Yeah, I'm not sure they should have to pay that. It should have perhaps been a lien on the property or something. I don't know. I mean, they were released from it, so I guess it's like a new request. Basically, I just, it's the whole reason the system was designed the way it was, and we, anyway.
Is there an opening?
Go ahead.
Is there a, what do you call it, a slot available for them to hook up? Is there?
Yeah.
There is.
Yep.
Okay.
So basically, they're going to require 1,350 gallons per day, which would be 5 equivalent residential units, basically. So.
So I guess, yeah, different question, but since we're having the same conversation with the co-op and others at the same time, is that the state mandated, or is that a metered use that they're aware of, or who came up with that number? Because I don't.
Michael Marquis.
What's that?
Michael Marquis. He does the engineering on the municipal to determine how many gallons per day. So he's based it on a 50-seat tavern restaurant at 27 gallons per day for up to 2 meals per day. So the proposed flows, so that's existing flows, and proposed flows are not going to change. So there's no change in existing and no change for the proposed.
I think we just, again, I think we just have to revisit policy as far as commercial entities are concerned, because, if they're going to sign up for 5 ERUs and come back to us in a year and say, oh, we only use 1.5, we want to pay a fraction of the cost.
Right.
That doesn't really work. I mean, if somebody's basing this stuff on a formula that somebody is telling them that it has to be based on, then I feel like metering, like, what's in it for us if we let everybody do that? And I know, whenever something like that occurs, that expense is getting transferred to somewhere because the system isn't cheaper to run regardless of how much water they're taking. So I just think we have to be, and I'm not arguing against this allocation. I have no problem with it at all. I just think we have to be really thoughtful about how we enter into these agreements with commercial entities because it seems to be coming back to bite us. So.
Right. And I think you're right. We definitely need to come up to date with the policy. And if the commercial units end up being metered, the metered rate is going to go up.
Should be adjusted. Exactly. Something like that. And there's got to be a happy medium here. I don't want to take advantage of anybody, but I also don't want to be taken advantage of. I mean, if these engineers are saying this is what it is and then it's not, I don't know. I think sometime that's going to turn into a problem for us. But
now the thing too, Josh. So Michael, he does his design based on the information he has, right? Then it goes up to Ron.
Right.
And they issue the permit. So I'm not
second guessing anybody's ability I have full confidence in Michael's ability to do this properly. I just, the co-op being a pretty blatant example of somebody did the engineering on that really recently, and now we're being told that it's something completely different. I don't really understand how that occurs. So, if either the state formula is wrong, and maybe that's what it is, and we just take the hit for that. But again, we got to figure out where we make that up for if we're allocating these and then turning around and rescinding them, So.
And we have to be fair. We have to be fair to all the users, across the board.
That's it, and it has. And if you're a commercial entity, and I know these commercial entities, most people are not getting. They're not lining their pockets heavily. So I want to encourage. We obviously want to be supportive of the businesses in town as well, but it has to be equitable distribution of the costs, because otherwise it's. If the co-op is running at the same cost as, a two-family residence, that doesn't feel quite right to me.
Right. Yeah. So in my spare time, I'll start that project.
Yeah. So could you, by lunch tomorrow, could we have some data, please?
Yeah, I'll get right on it.
So,
oh gosh,
are we needing to approve this, or are you just putting on this our radar for tonight, or are they in a hurry?
They're in a hurry, but I want to talk to Betsy first, because I want her to understand that they're going to get charged for 5 units.
Right. But in saying that, you also, that puts the onus on us to be able to say, okay, well, if it's not 5 units in 2 years, what does that mean for us?
Right.
The formulas just don't seem to add up, so I'm not sure how that works. But yeah, I don't want to spend any more time on it tonight than we need to, but if we're holding them up, I don't want to do that either. But we are meeting next week anyway, right? So if we had to do we could.
Right. Yeah, because I just got this on Monday, and I'm like, it didn't make the agenda, and I needed to look at it too. I'm just not comfortable throwing stuff at you guys if I don't have all the information. So we'll table that until next week.
Yeah, and I think generally speaking, we're supposed to avoid making decisions on things that weren't warned, but whenever possible. Okay, so moving on to the town manager's report, tax sale procedure and process.
Okay.
So I'm going
Nice
to move
simple
ahead
topic.
with that.
What was that?
What, John?
Nice simple topic.
I know, right? She's going to give us the abridged version, the Cliff Notes. You
I
know?
hope-
Yeah. So I am going to continue with the tax sale process. And the first letter is going to go out this week. We have approximately, I think it was $123,000 in delinquency. This includes water and sewer. So 2 years in arrears. You know, February 21st was the last payment. So anybody 2 years in arrears. What I expect will happen is most of those names will come off the list. If they currently have a mortgage, usually what happens is the banks will pay the delinquent taxes, and then they'll, you know, coordinate with the homeowner, and it goes in the mortgage somehow. So banks are really good about paying delinquent taxes. So there will be a couple, you know, the same ones that were on the list last year that'll go up for tax sale again. The good thing is, you know, 1 or 2, there are people interested in them already, so they might get sold. I think it's prudent for us to continue this process because it's going to help with our cash flow. I know the timing's not good, but 2 years previous COVID, and people have the opportunity to call and make tax payments.
Yeah.
So, and some people may try to abate, but I'm not sure if they're going to be successful with that. But just letting you know that I will proceed with the tax sale. And I'm hoping by July, probably August, early August, we'll see a tax sale date.
And just to remind folks, if they do call in and make arrangements with you that they won't go to tax sale, they can make arrangements with you. There are options, but they have to.
There are options to avoid tax sale.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when they get the letter, go ahead.
Well, just the main thing, I mean, I agree with you 100%, Laura, but the way you stated it was that if they call in and make arrangements, that's great, but then they have to stick to the arrangement in order to not go to tax sale, because that historically that's a, you know, oh yeah, no, we'll make a monthly payment and then you don't see anything. So, you know, make an arrangement and make the payments. And we're very receptive to goodwill as far as this is concerned. We're not receptive to deceptive use of the tools that are in the.
And we do have people on tax payments who are not active, who are on the tax sale list.
That's a bummer.
And once you miss a payment, and it's usually more than one, unfortunately.
Yeah. It just takes it really takes goodwill on the person's part in order to stay off that tax sale list at the stage that it's gotten to the point.
Yeah.
And it's not because
so 100,000.
But
so we'll see what happens. The next on my list is the bottle redemption, you know, for the pool. So we lost our person who comes and picks up the bottle. So we were the only town that he was picking bottles up for.
Just to clarify that it's not the person that sorts. We still have this person that comes and sorts everything. It's the service that was coming out and towing it for us.
Yeah. So Jules is still with us sorting bottles. Comes on Thursdays. It takes him about 2 hours. And so they go in the barn. He's got like 28 big bags of cans right now. and a few boxes. But so the driver that comes up to get the bottles sold his trailer. So there's no means right now to get the bottles to redemption. Jules sent me an email on Sunday, and he loves doing the bottles, sorting the bottles, and it's a nice program, and it benefits the pool. And he's taken it on as his baby, and he's actually pretty proud of it. And so Jonathan, I had Jonathan working and just kind of coordinating with Jules, with the bottles, and we ran into this problem, no way to get the bottles to Brattleboro. So Jules emailed me, and I talked to him on Monday, and I said, okay, Jules, what are your ideas? And he let me know, and I said, yeah, go ahead and call Ryan down at Brattleboro Redemption Center and see if he has any options. So Ryan is willing to use one of the U-Haul trucks, and he has a couple drivers willing to come up and get our bottles and cans once a month if needed for like $50. Now, mind you, we probably make about maybe $250 on a trip with the bottles. So in my mind, the liability is off of the town. Now, Jules was going to do it, but he was a little nervous about, using his own truck. And as a volunteer, we would have to put something in place, like a waiver. So if anything happened, he wouldn't come after the town. So I like the idea of the U-Haul. It gets, they have the liability, they have the insurance. They come get the bottles, they bring them back, they sort them. We end up with a check. We're cleaning out the barn. Jules said if we store more bottles and cans in there, maybe we can have a trip, somebody come up every 3 months to get them. So right now we have all the bikes in there, and the same day I talked to Jules, Dan Hovis called me. I'm like, oh, I said, hey, Dan. I go, by the way, I said, you have all your bikes still in the barn? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I really would like to come and get them. And I'm like, yeah, we really need the storage now. And so within the next 2 weeks, he stated that he will have the bikes out of the barn. So that frees up space for storing cans and bottles. And then we can maybe do a quarterly pickup, through Brattleboro Redemption Center. Jules wants to continue. He asked if I could get another tote for outside, because he said if we had a 5th tote, then there would be no bottles on the ground. And the other thing, too, is we need signage. For educational purposes, he is getting, bags. He gets grain bags. Because people come and they drop their stuff off, and they don't dump them into the totes. They just put it in the bag and put it right in the tote. So Brian just cleaned out a ton of cardboard, 4 containers of trash. There's certain bottles that, we can't take to the redemption. So Jules wants to manage the whole program. And I let him know that he and I would be working together to find a solution that works. I think it's important that we continue doing the redemption for the pool. It's a little bit of money and it's a little bit of work, and Jules enjoys doing it. And he also stated that the co-op, all of their redemptions are actually going in the trash right now. So he's willing to set something up there. Not that he really wants to expand this program, because he's just one person, but he would be willing to take the co-op's redemptions and put them in with ours.
Maybe this is how we could get our dump truck.
There you go.
Yes.
And then we could use it to take the bottom down.
It's a cycle of life.
So I'm gonna try to negotiate, a solution that there's no liability on the town.
Sounds good. Good plan.
Okay. So town business protocol for soft opening. Starting Monday, I'm going to have Jonathan and Alyssa back in the office. And I'm still waiting on supplies. I have Fletcher Proctor coming in this Friday because he needs to go through some zoning files. But I'll be the only one in the office. But we are getting ready to take appointment only. And it's going to be a case-by-case basis. And it'll probably only be one person at a time in the office. So I'll let you know how that turns out.
Karen, when you put a protocol in place, could you forward it so that we could get it? I think it would be good to publicize it.
Yeah.
Just to let the community know what's going on, what they can expect.
Right. And I've been looking at other towns too and seeing what other towns are doing.
Yeah.
Some are, we have masks in the office. We have sanitizer in the office. We have signage and so we're almost ready.
Yeah.
We just need more gloves. We don't have enough gloves, but we'll work through that.
All right. Talk to me offline about that. I might be able to help.
Yeah, I might have those around too.
Okay.
All right. So mowing contract and cemetery mowing contract. I made a mistake, and I want to correct that from our last regular meeting. So the mowing contract for public buildings and the cemetery mowing contract are actually not up until next year. Okay, so my mind was thinking fiscal year, and the contract with McGowan are actually annual. So his goes from spring to fall on an annual basis. So it's kind of like in two different fiscal years. So that was my mistake. So he still has another year of mowing with the town for both the cemetery and the public buildings. So I want to make that clear because I did misstate myself. It was an honest mistake. So the other thing too, I spoke to him because we had mentioned some damaged headstones. And I explained to him, anytime we get phone calls, they go to the cemetery commissioners. So I will follow up with them to make sure if in the future there's any other calls that the cemetery commissioners reach out to the mowing company, the mowing contractor, and try to work that out. But, headstones get damaged from different things. It could be a tree that fell, it could be a car that hit it, it could be, kids that vandalize it. It's not necessarily, a lawnmower or a trimmer, but things happen. Stones break down sometimes too,
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make it clear that there was no intent to blame anybody. So, and certain people do take pride in their work.
Yeah. Knowing Eric and having spoken to him a little bit about this, I will say that knowing him, he takes an enormous amount of pride in his work. And having spoken to him about this a little bit, he really does want the feedback and would like to be able to address
Yeah.
it in the moment. So I think it's great that you're putting a system in place so that that will happen in the future.
Yeah.
And it may
And
not
I
be
don't
on
always,
him, but he wants the feedback.
right. And I don't always pay attention because the cemetery commissioners are elected. So that's not even in my purview to even like, but if I take a call and I know there's damage somewhere, then I pass it along, but I don't make sure that there's follow through on it, you know? So I presume that it's being taken care of, but maybe that's something we got to talk about, but I'll talk to the cemetery commissioners first and see if they have a policy or something in place to handle this type of phone call or complaints. One other thing I have on my report, ACH payments are now active, so people can pay with a credit card, debit card, I believe it was, and now ACH. There's a form that people have to fill out. So basically, it's allowing us to go into somebody's account and take a payment out. And it can be for taxes and it can be for water or sewer. So that is now online and active. So if anybody's interested in paying through ACH, we have the ability to do that.
Wonderful. All right.
Let me see what else is going on here. Okay. Well, we have plenty of gloves according to Lista.
Oh, okay, good.
We have more coming next week. So that's it for me.
Great. All right, warrants. Warrants. Can you hear me? No sound for me?
Motion.
All right, no, I was on mute, sorry. I'll make a motion to approve and execute the warrants as presented upon completion of review.
And I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
No.
Hearing no discussion. All in favor? Aye.
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 Okay. Oh.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, what?
Hang on a minute. All right, so accounts payable. We're going to start with that one. April 25th through May 8th, 2020, in the amount of $41,148.78.
Are we
I'm
just
good.
looking? Okay.
If anybody has any questions, I have the actual invoices with me.
Seemed pretty straightforward to me,
Yeah. I agree.
especially at 9:10 at night.
I know. Like the words are blurring.
I'm sorry. I knew this was going to be a long meeting. David, you're all set?
I'm all set.
Okay. So payroll warrant dated May 8th, 2020 in the amount of $14,170.92.
Are we all pretending to sign?
I'm all good.
I'm all good.
Good. All set. All right.
All right. Other business?
No.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I really am like, phew, going out. out of this. Karen's review, I sent out an email and we can respond just about scheduling. So if you guys, just a gentle nudge that we should
Okay.
keep that ball rolling.
Yeah.
And then adopting the VLCT guidelines for our meetings. Maybe do that next meeting. This was such a jam full.
Right.
I didn't want to push any more on our plates tonight. As I recognized when Karen and I talked about this agenda that it was going to be a doozy. I had no idea it would be a 9/12 doozy, but so yeah, that's it.
Glad I'm not doing minutes.
Oh my gosh. Sorry, Alyssa. And do we need an executive session?
No.
Thank goodness. All right. Our next
I'll move
regular
Oh, go ahead.
Our next regular meeting date is May 20th, 2020, and we are still doing a special meeting next Wednesday on the 13th at 5 o'clock. And Karen and I were talking about during this kind of lull while we're going into response of maybe taking a week off from that in the near future. So
Yeah.
I think we'll talk about that next week when we all have our wits about us again.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we will meet next week, though.
We will meet next week. Yeah.
Yeah.
At
Sounds
5.
good.
At 5.
Yep. 5.
5. That many.
No,
No, not that many.
Not 10.
Don't confuse us.
Oh,
All right. So I'll move to adjourn.
and I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Oh, thank goodness. Oh, all in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Good night.
Good
Aye.
night.